Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order, verify compliance with open meetings law notification, and adopt the agenda. If you can all stand and pledge the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Item 3 is comments from audience regarding agenda items. This is the only time audience members may comment on current agenda items during this meeting. Before addressing the board, please state your name, address, and current agenda item. You may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Any comments today?
Hi. Eileen Velitis, 9160 Wildflower Court, Hills Corners. I'm here to comment on agenda item 3, comments from the audience regarding agenda items, and 6A, which is the discussion of the Neola Policy Manual. My focus is on Neola Policies 167.3, public participation at board meetings, and Neola 166, the agenda. First thing I wanted to point out that in the public packet, what was printed on today's agenda is instructions for citizens wishing to address the school board is not in accordance with our current policy procedures 187R. Currently, an attendee does not have to register their intention to speak upon arrival at the meeting, but that's okay, I signed it. Current presentations, are 5, but it says 3 on the public packet, 3 minutes. Further, this is not actually the only time public participation is permitted during the committee of the whole meeting if you look at 187R. Currently, at committee of the whole meetings, the board may/shall provide an opportunity for public comment after each agenda item, not to exceed 5 minutes per agenda item. I do not understand, I wrote this down so I could get this nice and concise in my minutes. I do not understand why the written procedures on today's agendas are not per current policy and procedure, and I really don't understand why over the past few years the practice keeps changing without discussion and notification to the board or to the community. To address this new Neola Policy 167.3, I just want to start with a quick background about public participation at Whitnall board meetings. Generally, there's been 2 meetings a month, a committee of the whole and a board business meeting. In the past, the public could comment, it used to be, at the board business meeting, the public could comment on future or current agenda items. Committee of the whole meetings were limited to agenda items only. Then it appears at some point in December 2014, without any documented notification to the board of public, the practice of limiting public participation, even at the board businesses, changed to agenda items only. Now, the board is being asked to approve a new policy, a Neola Policy 167.3, policy that not only continues on approved changes, but places even further restrictions on public participation at board meetings, and these are some of the things when I read through it. It limits all meetings to just agenda items. It limits persons to 3 minutes, as opposed to 5. And if a person or group wishes to have an item placed on agenda, they need to request this to the superintendent no later than 14 days prior to the meeting. My question to this board is, why is there a continued push to make public participation at Whitnall board meetings more restrictive? I even checked Greendale and Greenfield board agendas, and I don't see where they have the same number of restrictions on audience participations at their meetings. I don't understand the continued pushing to restrict public input when the philosophy intent of the board, and I'll quote the policy 123 Neola, that if you approve this package, the intent of the board is to maintain 2-way communication with citizens of the district. The board shall keep them informed of the progress and problems of the school district, and the citizens shall be urged to bring their aspirations and concerns to the district, about the district, to the attention of the board. I don't think this new policy maintains this 2-way open communication, and I don't think it really aspires people in the district to bring their concerns and thoughts to the board. So I'm here basically to encourage you guys not to approve this policy as it is, but to review it and to revise it to provide really what would be two-way communication between all stakeholders in the board. So that's my concerns with 167.3. Then I didn't go through all 750 pages, but I also looked at policy 166, which deals with preparing the agenda for the school board meeting. So currently, we have a policy, whereas one where the board president communicates with the superintendent to construct the agenda, okay? This new one in Neola, quote, says, superintendent shall prepare and submit to each board member an agenda. My question to this board is, if this is a school board meeting, shouldn't the school board president be involved in the construction of the agenda? So those are my two thoughts on those items. And I'd like some consideration tonight in your discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you. We don't have anything for student and staff spotlight tonight, so we'll move on to item number 5, committee reports. For 5A, we have no reports for finance, facilities, and personnel. Quinn has an update for the policy committee.
I do.
Oh, we had a meeting.
We had 2 meetings, and the fruits of our meetings are going to be on display tonight.
Great. Do you have any updates?
Yeah, and I would like to thank the administration, teachers, whoever helped through this whole process. It's been 6 months?
Yeah, January we started, so.
Yeah, quite a big process, quite a big undertaking, and Kathy and Lisa did a lot of the heavy lifting, as did a lot of administration and board members as well. So I really appreciate all the help that's gone into getting this done.
Thank you. Okay. Do you have anything from legislative or SWSA?
They must go on hiatus during the summer, huh?
No, today she sent out a.
I got that,
Yeah. So.
But as far as the meetings, we haven't had one. I think we're going to have one with 2 great speakers coming up. Can't wait for that. But everything is on hold, really is on hold because of the budget is being, and then they throw Foxconn in there, and so that's really stretching it out. So it seemed like in the update we got today that maybe by the end of the week they may have a budget.
Okay, thank you. 5B, superintendent report. Just as a note, the annual goals are still the district goals. They're still being created, so we'll have information during the August 28th meeting to address but then Lisa?
Yeah, so I think facilities planning, we have that later, as you know that Bray Architects is here, and we'll be presenting part of that facilities planning, shared with the board sort of the timeline that we had had a conference call with Bray, what that timeline looks like. On August 28th, we have a regular business meeting, and the plan is to have a workshop after that for the board to discuss specifically and debrief, so it will give the board a couple weeks from the information they hear tonight to debrief that, hear that, and then sort of have some conversations around that. I think that you'll hear some what homework might be. I think it was a lot of information you saw last time, and you'll see similar information about the high school building today. They're going to synthesize that for you tonight, so you won't be expected to read every page and know all of those specs and diagrams. So but I think by the end of tonight, it'll be very clear what that will be. So on the 28th, and obviously the community is invited to that workshop because we'll be talking through that also at the end of that. The plans are, we've been working also with school perceptions to come up with the second survey. We have a draft of the framework of it, but obviously the information that the board has on the 28th will be critical. Want the board to really look through the survey after that, so the information on the 28th will go into that. A draft will go out to read that. Also some other key communicators in the community to read through that who haven't been as close to it maybe as we have, to sort of say, if you got this survey, what questions might you still have, or is the survey drafted well enough, with the plans of being able to release that by the end of September. So that's sort of the timeline for the facilities planning tonight, but I think since there is an agenda item later on that will more thoroughly explain what that is, I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. The strategic visioning part of it, right now Logan has drafted probably a 10-page report about the process we went through in 2016-17 with the focus groups and the showing of the screening and all of those types of things that sort of capture all of that I think will be important. We're also planning on sending out our hard copy newsletter the middle of September, that will have that in there, and we'll reference that document so folks can see that. We think that timing will be good right before the survey comes out, so they can, if they haven't been keeping in touch with what we've been doing possibly over last year, they'll have an opportunity to review what 2016-17 was in terms of some of our planning. And then use that, I think that strategic planning will come, when we look at the district goals, as I've been working with the directors, what are those district goals? As we look forward and still working a lot on getting some structures and systems in place that, in order for us to do, we've talked about a district scorecard and looking at that, so we'll continue working on those pieces, I think, from a strategic piece. And so we'll have a little bit more conversation on August 28th with that, but that's where we are on those things right now.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
I got a text today from a resident, and he is wondering if, I heard Whitnall will have another RFP coming out for construction services.
Well, that would be if the referendum passes.
Right.
If we
That's
go to
what I thought.
referendum, I'm unaware of.
Or
Todd, do you know of
doing
any
it.
RFPs? No, and that's still quite a ways away.
Yep, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so C's administrative reports, facilities planning, ongoing discussion with Ray.
Yeah, so we have a second person, yeah, if we can, he's coming from West Bend right
Okay.
now, so we're he's
So,
on the
no,
road
that's
right
fine.
now.
So
if
why don't
can.
we skip that and move on to the continuation of the graduation venue discussion? Todd and Mike.
Yeah, sure. So I'll let Todd take this in just a second. But since our last board meeting, we've gotten a few options available to us as far as really cooling. I was gonna say heating and cooling, but cooling in that gym space as we begin to look at possibilities for where to hold graduation next year. So Todd, I don't know if you kind of want to just go through what some of those options are that we've gotten and maybe some of the vendor. Yeah, that would be great.
So what I have are about 4 options as far as pricing goes. Option 1 is a package air conditioning rental unit, which is going to come in on a semi-trailer with its own power system, a generator. For a 2-day rental of that equipment, we're looking at a ballpark between $10,000 and $12,000. Option 2 would be a 2-month rental for the same equipment. That would be, we could split that up either for the spring use or in fall use for sports. That rental equipment would cost us about $16,000. Option 3 is 6-month use, which would provide us more cooling in the spring, more cooling in the fall. That option comes in at about $55,000. And then the last option, which is using our existing chiller and running new chilled water lines to the gymnasium, that option is around $150,000. That's a permanent option.
So just as we kind of just discussed, what are those possibilities of having, having a comfortable graduation inside? Those are just the preliminary numbers, very ballparkish. It's just one vendor who came in. We feel like there are obviously other options and other quotes and speaking of RFP, obviously if you get into some of those more permanent solutions, there would be an RFP process if we would go down that route to a permanent solution. But that's simply having it inside. We continue to talk about, I can't recall from the last board meeting, the possibility of having it on Whitnall Field. The discussion was, does it really make sense to have 2 different setups, use the time to have 2 different setups, protect the field out there, not have it rip, custodial time in which to do that over and over for how many years that we've been doing that, and we would continue to do that, and just didn't really know if that was very feasible to do. So if we're looking at the inside venue, these are the options that we investigated up to this point.
Right.
Lisa, did you have a chance to talk to Gary at Greendale? Because that's what they do.
In what they do.
They have the outdoors, and if it's inclement, they come inside.
But they don't have turf, correct?
I don't know
They
that
do?
for a fact, do they?
Okay, so I didn't know that they had turf in terms of that. So they do, it's the decision of the, the custodial time and wanting to balance that in terms of that. So I can follow up on the turf piece of it or how they do that or where they do that, so.
I think some of the important discussion too is that that's only, as we look at that gym area, we're counting on that. We only need the heating and cooling for 1 day, out of the year, when that's really not The case that we kind of discussed about is teams are in there, especially over the winter months. You know, whether there's indoor practices in there and different things that are going on. It's probably worth at some point investigating whether a permanent solution is worthwhile to the district, as it is not just a one-day solution that is needed in that gym.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so on the option 4 there, the permanent solution, it's got to, obviously they're doing more than just running new chiller, new water lines from the chiller. Is it for 155,000? Is it like duct work? Would that include installing duct work, like hanging from the ceiling, or?
So we would use the existing ductwork that provides the heat to the gym.
Okay.
What that involves is running chilled water lines from about a center point of the building to the gymnasium. And then we have to put in what's called a coil in the air handler unit. That's where the large expense come in, is that there's actually 2 coils that go into our existing air handlers. That's a major part of the cost. So there is no new ductwork, we're using existing ductwork.
Okay, and I can't remember, I think a previous permanent solution meant that we would have to shut off air conditioning to part of the building in order to air condition that particular space. Is that still the case in the solution you're talking about?
So what they offered as part of a solution to a permanent using our chiller was to put in valves that would actually restrict or flow the cold water each direction equally versus pumping it into the existing part of the building. So there would be some valve work just to balance the system, I guess, is a better way to put it.
But we would still be providing cool air to the,
Yes.
we wouldn't have to turn any, we wouldn't have to let part of the building warm up in order to cool down that.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember, but I believe in the last referendum try, this piece was well over 300,000. I don't know if we're comparing apples to apples, but I don't know if anybody remembers, but that was a piece to do the air conditioning in the gymnasium, and I know it was a lot more expensive than that.
Part of that piece may have been adding in,
I don't remember how much it was, but I remember it was.
We did have it
Yeah, we
priced
did have
out.
it in there, yeah.
It wasn't a separate question, though, it was included in some
Yeah, it was-
overall?
It was
Okay.
listed as a line item.
Okay.
But it was, I think at least, I'm thinking in the 300,000s.
and part of that piece I don't know, but that could have been adding another chiller to the building.
Right, I don't know if we're comparing apples to
Yeah,
apples.
so maybe instead of putting you on the spot to do hypotheticals, if we can look into that and see and compare, I don't know, Mike and if you guys can take a look at that.
Sure.
See what the last one was calling for, see what the difference would be.
Yeah, because
Go from there.
I think I'm with John that temporary solution is not worth the money.
No, it's not. I mean, I can remember when we were, for our candidate forum, the first question they asked was cooling the gymnasium. So obviously, it's been a constant issue for
Sure.
years. So if we can find a permanent solution, find a way to make it work
I agree.
monetarily, let's explore it. So if you can work with Mike, take a look at what the last quote was.
Sure.
Try to break that out. It can just be a memo. It doesn't have to be anything over the top. Just send us a memo explaining the differences. And I don't think we're at a point where we want to go to RFP, but just get an idea for timeline, how long it takes to get done, all that.
Sure.
Sound good?
I can do that.
Anybody else have any other questions?
I have a question on
Yeah.
these, on the numbers, so maybe I wrote them down
Mhm.
incorrectly. But so you said option 2 was a 2-month, and that was 16,000?
That's what I wrote down too.
Yes.
Option 3 is a 6-month for 55,000?
Yes.
But if you did 3 2-months, it would only be 48,000.
There's also fuel charges in there. The longer we run it, the more expensive it is, because we're powering with a generator. We're not using any power in the building.
Okay.
So there's fuel charges in there as well, which may change, or you couldn't just multiply it out and make it an equal number.
Okay. All right, that makes sense then.
Good?
Thank you. All right, so since they're not here, should we just move on? Is everybody comfortable with us going on to item 6, and then once the other gentleman from Bray gets here, going back and covering it? Is everybody okay? All right, so then we'll move on to Item 6, discussion. Item 6A is Neola Policy Manual. So,
Sure.
I-
Couldn't feel free to jump in, but I think as was stated before, the board made the decision, we had some conversations last November, December, and made that decision to move forward with a board policy management service. Couple different reasons. I think a primary one is that it's searchable, and I think we've all had that situation in trying to find a board policy or policies that relate to a certain topic. And for our community parents, trying to find a board policy specifically, having something that would be searchable in combination with our website software right now not being as robust as it could be makes it very cumbersome to try to find board policies and organize them in terms of that. Also, the process of making sure that they're completely up to date with as far as laws and some of those other pieces that had been there and the overwhelming task. And so I had made that decision. So starting in January, we started looking at them internally. That involved any administrators that were relative to policies that were part of what they did. So HR, business management. Eric, before he left, reviewed all the technology ones and spent probably half a day with the Neola rep going through all of our technology policies. Matt had put some time in, Mike had. So a lot of people have put time in looking at that, the principles when it was relevant to some of the student policies. And so after that between administrators and going through that with Neola, had 2 policy committee meetings that were open to review what those were, had combinations in which Kathy had crosswalked the current policies with what the new policies would be, Neola, and the reverse, and then also tried to create a document that talked about a summary of changes that were made between the two. It's not perfect, obviously. There were some policies that we had that over time either don't make sense, laws changed, some we kept, some policies we were missing, which was usually the case, more than not the case, that we had gaps in some of the things. Changes in laws or ways that they were put together may have also changed that. Sometimes we took what they suggested and added our language to augment it. There were things locally that wanted to be kept in there. And so that was that process up until there. So we held 2 policy committee meetings. After the first one, members there had questions for Neola about that. We had sent them there, got responses. Some were, yep, good catch. Some were like, here's why we're doing it that way. Or some were like, that's really your local decision. That would not change the intent of that. We had to be a little bit careful because sometimes changing the language or that would change the intent of it. And as we all talked about before, when Neola developed them with their team of lawyers, they will defend those board policies should you ever get called to question in terms of not following, if you follow the policy and as it's written, in terms of providing you legal support with that. So went through that. I think that we decided as a group that was there for both evenings that there were a few policies to bring forward to the entire board that need to have some larger conversations. And I think we listed those, and so we can go through each of those. But that was sort of the process that was followed. We still had a couple questions that I think we've gotten back from there in terms of that's a local decision, you can find that. There will be, we found a few grammatical, typographical things in terms of that whole process. As far as that is. A little tricky tonight because, as you know, the new Neola website is HTML coding. It's not meant to be printable, so to get the public those there was very putsy and tricky because it's not meant to be PDF. They aren't Word documents in the way that we're used to creating and them PDFing them. So that's where we find ourselves tonight. The 4 policies that were identified by the group to talk about doesn't mean that there may not be questions from others, but really decided there needed to be some discussions were 167.0, 167.3, which is public participation at board meetings. The second policy was 6235 fund balance. Policy 6320 purchasing. And the last one was 9140 citizens advisory committees. We felt that there were some conversations there that smaller group didn't want to make and wanted to bring to the whole in terms of what that looks like. So that's the background leading up until that. So I don't know how you want to kick off the discussion, if you want to start with there, if there's some general comments or anything you want to add, Quinn, in terms of that.
Well, I think one thing that as being the chair for, 2 or 3 years now, we will, through time, be brought policies to be looked at, just like in the past, I would assume.
Absolutely.
So are these written in stone? No. I mean, administration or teacher or the public may see something and bring it to us just like in the past, and we will take it to committee, research it, and bring it to the meeting, to the board as a whole. So I don't think that part of it will change. If we miss something tonight, if we don't, it will be caught sooner or later as policies worked on.
Yep. And that's a good point to bring. This is a major shift in getting it to one system. They do twice a year updates every year, and those, I'm guessing, would come to the policy committee. So the policy committee will at least be meeting that much. Sometimes there's special updates that happened a couple years ago when the legislature met and they said you have to change the approval of academic standards by July 1st. And so quick, they sent out a special update. So those will still happen and those will still be vetted through, just as there might be something locally that occurs that might be unique that they don't have a policy for. That may be less than in the past, but that would be another reason why to do that, or you need to revisit that. But that procedure won't stop. I mean, this won't be like a one and done and we're all good tonight. This is a major, as I've said, a once in a lifetime activity in terms of switching all the board policies over to this new system. The other thing I wanted to point out in a conversation with Richard today was, depending upon where you're coming from in whatever system, the next step is developing the administrative guidelines, which we've had as, for most of our policies, not all of them had those. But typically boards don't approve that piece of it. I think in this process this year to go through policy committee is something that I would recommend. But there is an in-between step in which if there are some guidelines or in terms of protocols that the board wants specific oversight on, you can actually, there's an in-between level, which would be called, instead of an administrative guideline, they could be policy guidelines in which you would actually put those within the policy, if that makes sense. Because there are, like, if you look at the 1000 series, which are board protocol things, I don't feel comfortable alone administratively making the procedures that go with that, because those are really some things that the board acts out on. So you can actually put those within the policy and call those policy guidelines. He gave an example that the Waukesha School District did that this year in terms of how they did. So the majority of them are going to be administrative guidelines in which administrators come up with some of the policies and how to, or the procedures, protocols on how to do it. But there might be some in which the board actually wants to quote approve, and to differentiate between a board approving some of the guidelines and administratively doing that to decide, well, which ones we did. You can actually make them. So you would actually go back and put those in there. And I can see a couple of the policies having those types of things where the board would actually want to approve the guidelines, but you would not want to approve all the guidelines. That's not a protocol that the board would want to take on. So I just wanted to mention that in a conversation with him today. Because I did ask that early on, where there is a couple in the 1000 series in terms of if it's evaluation of the superintendent or how the board operates. Those are really board things that the board should work through in terms of that. That shouldn't be done administratively. So that's a way of, when we get into these guidelines, of differentiating administrative guidelines versus policy guidelines, that the board could have some oversight, if that helps clarify what the next step in the process will be.
Lisa, if Neola sends a legal update, we wouldn't have to take that committee, would we? We would just bring it right to the board?
That
So
would,
it's gonna
right, so,
automatically change.
yeah, so I would probably share it out and they will tell you, like if it's a mandatory thing, like the USDA thing that says you have to get, there isn't, that's a non-negotiable, or you have to stop
Right.
serving food. I mean, those are some non-negotiables. I would send it out in a memo to the board, like the law changed, like this word has to change. There are some that came up in the policy update that just came to us, that the board has some options. Like sometimes they give you a local option to choose from. Those would be the ones. So you're correct. And if it's just a technical, grammatical change and those types of things, and the law changed because of it, if they changed a word, it probably would not. It would just be brought here and say it's a technical change. But if the board has choices to make within a policy, then that would be a case where I'd bring it to the committee. Yeah. Okay,
So, as you said, the first policy we're going to review is 0167.3. Do you want to take that, Quinn? Do you want to discuss the questions we had on that?
I'm not even sure where to find it. We don't have it up on the board?
We can.
That'd be great.
Um,
Push it off on Chris.
Yeah, ask him.
please.
Which I don't know if you want the new proposed one or the old one. That's the tricky part because we're going to be looking at two of them. So I think that there was some conversation earlier tonight, but we at the policy committee had talked about the public participation. And so,
Well, I would suggest going to the new one. 'cause
Okay,
That's what
sure.
we're gonna, we are.
yep.
I think that we need to compare and contrast it to what we have now.
Yeah, we're not following, so the policy is pretty bland.
The old ones we can get on our device though.
Except I couldn't find 187R. I don't know where Ms. Elias got it.
67,
I requested a
It's 187R.
187 there?
So why is it not available online?
Those are, oh, go ahead.
There've been a series of emails about that. This goes back to the policy committee. Part of it's in practice and part is not. So we're not even following it. So it was decided to remove it because it's just a procedure, not an actual policy. It's a procedure. It was removed. If you check your email, it's in there.
I looked in the email, I didn't find anything on it other than somebody's request for where it was, and I wondered the same thing.
They put it in, I know it's not in the policy, but it's in the packet of things for the meeting today. If you want-
I looked
if you
there.
just want to grab it.
I'll look
It
again.
just went earlier today, I think.
In any case, and we can just have procedures pulled out of there without,
Yeah, because they're not board votes, correct.
and we would all be notified of it at the time.
It was correct.
So when 187R was
Yeah,
pulled,
absolutely.
we were notified.
Yes.
I will look for that.
Okay.
Can you read it, Quinn?
You asking a guy with glasses?
I have glasses and I still can't read it.
About 150%.
I was thinking more like 300.
There you go,
That's
that's
the
better.
Neola one, yeah.
Yeah, we sat a lot closer last time. The Board of Education recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and the importance of allowing members of the public to express themselves on district matters. Agenda item. Any person or group wishing to have an item placed on the agenda shall submit their request to the superintendent no later than 14 calendar days prior to the meeting that include. Well, let's just stop with that paragraph. Is everybody comfortable with a 14-day lag time to the superintendent?
I thought maybe we could just take all of that out because it's all irrelevant because it's going to be up to them as to when it gets on the agenda. Just because they submit 14 days doesn't mean it's going to get on there, correct?
No, but
Can you take that out?
Well, this is about adding a new item.
Right. They're not guaranteed just because they submit it 14 days ahead of time that it will get on.
It's not necessarily a guarantee, but
Right.
I guess you could rephrase it if you want, like, trying to read it myself, that if something is to get on there, it needs to have been at least that far in
Yeah.
advance, is what it is. It's just ensuring that it doesn't end up getting there the day before the meeting or the Thursday before, and even if it is something that we should get on there, for it to be on there right away.
Yeah, I think I don't think there's a big issue with, it's adding an agenda item. I don't think having it 2 weeks out is out of the question. I think it reads well.
Well, except that it does kind of give the impression that if they get it in 14 days in advance, it's going to be on that next agenda.
And you might have to change that to any person or group wishing to have an item considered, for the agenda of an
instead
upcoming
of
meeting.
placed, I agree.
Yeah. Shall submit their request to be no later than 14 days prior to the intended, the meeting of the agenda intended or something.
Yeah. And again, I think the intent for that is with if we're trying to get board packets out in a, that there's, if I'm a person who's requesting it, and this was suggested language, so we looked at it too, I think was that a person has understanding that they can't do it the day before, that we have some posting protocols. And I think it was just to give the person who wanted something on there some timeline of how early they have to put it on there. They can't call Monday morning and expect it to put on their Monday night. So it's just to give them a guideline. Again, protocol, I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule, but I think the word considered is probably better than placed.
Okay.
I mean, we as board members won't even get that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll put it on.
Yeah, so I think adding considered instead of place.
In there. All right, so name and address, yeah, group, topic, yep. Such request shall be subject to the approval of the superintendent and the board president.
Which is the current.
Current.
Okay. Public participation section of the meeting. To permit fair and orderly public expression, the board shall provide a period of public participation at every regular meeting of the board and publish rules to govern such participation in board meetings. Everybody go with that? The presiding officer of each board meeting at which public participation is permitted shall administer the rules of the board for its conduct. The presiding officer shall be guided by the following rules. A public participation shall be permitted as indicated on the order of business. B, anyone having a legitimate interest in an agenda item may participate during the public portion of a meeting. C, attendees must register their intention to participate in the public portion of a meeting upon their arrival at the meeting.
I have a problem with that.
So what's the purpose of that?
Right.
I'm sorry, what, of
C.
purpose?
Okay, I said I have a problem with it. She wondered what the purpose was, so did Stephanie.
See.
For registering with it?
Mhm.
That's pretty common practice, and part of it is to follow up with this, to follow up with the person if they wanted to, yeah, so like sometimes we've had a situation where somebody has talked, and if you don't know who was that or whatever, and you actually wanted to follow up with them, and so,
But they have to state their name and address when they come up. So some things may happen where somebody comes in, they sit down, they hear what somebody else says, and then they want to make a comment, but they're not registered. I don't see a purpose for the registration, except it may give people the impression that once the meeting started, they aren't allowed to speak up. So I just don't see a purpose of the registration, because they have to come up and state their name and address.
Let me add it, so the clipboard's still there. So to your point, if someone came in and spoke, they could add their information later, but it has more than just name and address on there, correct?
yeah, so I think
So
like
as
when
a
I want to
fill-in.
go to the, I mean, part of it is to have it in writing, because if you record some of that, part of it is just to have it in writing, we accurately can do that. If we wanted to follow up with a citizen or whoever, they might not be a citizen, they could be whomever.
So instead of registering ahead of time, we could put, if you wanted extra information, you could put the clipboard at the table there. And if they come up to speak, they can put the information on there.
I think
I
we're
just
taking
don't-
out of their 5 minutes to
I don't,
talk.
I think that it seems, I mean, I think Eileen said it, she said a lot of things, right, a lot of what I was thinking and what she had to say. But one of the things that really bothered me was this registering their intent to participate. I think that it seems very, to me, it just seems a little bit more imposing than we need to be.
Can I have a comment?
Yeah.
I thought maybe we could just say the board president may require, because there are times when there's large meetings, and in those circumstances, it's very nice to have had people registered. It's possible you could say may, and then that may
Yeah.
satisfy, we don't need it at all of our board meetings, you know.
And I
We're
think
very
that
flexible.
and that was the other part I was going to say to that, because if you read further down, you may limit the topic, like if there are 20 people here who are here from the same group or whatever, you can require that only they have a spokesperson. So that is the intent of pre-registering, so right before it starts, either Kathy or the board president would go and look at it and say, we have 25 people to speak on whatever, we're going to modify our rules or participation. So there is a purpose for that, so I guess,
Well, by putting may, gives us an option. Policies are made to be vague.
May be
Good
required
point.
to register. Because if you know it's going to be something like taxes, referendum,
The annual meeting.
the annual meeting, that kind of thing, then I could see you having something out there like that. But in your basic meeting like tonight, I don't think, not only is it not necessary, but again, I think that standard language of must register is, I could support something like attendees may be required to register their intention to participate. I mean, I could see supporting something like that if our intention of it is for the purposes that Dr. Olson described, but other than that, no.
are we harming anyone by having them give us their name, address, and phone number if they're already giving it during here? The only thing we're getting is you're getting the phone number, the addition, right?
Yep, that's what's on the sheet.
I mean, are we
But
harming anybody
but
by?
to
I'm just
Lisa's
saying.
point, if there is a large contingent, we could help move the meeting along by
Absolutely.
saying, we're gonna give to the first 5 people. The first 5 people, please, if the person ahead of you says what you wanna say, please pass.
Yeah, so that's why I think, I don't think there's any harm, and I don't think it deters anyone from
I think though,
speaking.
when you add it to the rest of the policy, I think that it sets up a culture of just being a little intimidating. And I also think that if there's 20 people to speak and they each get 3 minutes, which, like was mentioned earlier, used to be 5, and I don't think we should be cutting the time down, but I think that, I mean, the whole thing sets up a culture of, we want to hear from you, maybe to a limited extent when we choose, and that's not the open communication that I think we need to push for, and the culture we need to perpetuate on the board.
But it may also lead to order. If there is a hot button topic, which we haven't had for a while, but if there is, this little C item might help order take place.
So what happens? So 20 folks come and they all get their stuff down. I'm sorry, I'm almost done. So 20 folks come and they get their stuff down, and then somebody looks at it and says, oh no, we're only going to listen to the top 5. So are we going to pause? Are we going to hold off on the meeting, start it late so that 20 folks can go outside and decide who get to be the 5 spokespeople, and they get organized on the 5?
But that's the same thing we ask now, though, that if there's a large group and you're coming as a group, that you select someone to speak on your behalf. So again,
Since
The
we already
only-
asked
the only
it, it's
difference-
unnecessary.
the only difference we're doing now is asking them to write their information down instead of just verbally saying.
When I went
it.
to
think
the,
we're thinking too much into it, reading too much, into C. I'm not talking about the rest, I'm talking about C. We're just asking them to write it on a piece of paper. Not saying if you don't register before the meeting, you can't talk. We're writing it on a piece of paper. That's the only change we're making.
Then I propose we want to do that, we change it to may be required to register, and that we can have it at the desk. We could have it at the desk every day, but may be required to register in advance on the bigger meetings in the back.
I don't agree with having it up here.
Personally, I don't
Just-
feel I'm reading into it. I think it sets up, I think it's part of the puzzle of a culture that I'm not happy with.
By asking them to write the information down.
And that's a piece of it.
But again, we're just taking C, so asking them to write it down.
I'm talking about, well, listen, I'm talking about C, and you want to know what I have a problem with. And I say, my problem with C is when you put it with the rest of them, I think it establishes a culture that I'm not happy with.
When I went to the State of Wisconsin Finance, what was the budget hearing at State
Oh,
Fair.
yeah.
So we all had to
Joint
wait in this
finance
long
rates.
line. Calmly, people talked, came up, they asked us what we were there for. We told them, we wrote it just like this. We wrote it down, went, sat inside, listened, all the lawmakers were up there, and when your turn came, you got to speak. But it was very orderly for a large amount of people. Now, if they would have just let everybody go in and go rush to the speaker, it wouldn't have came off. Now, we don't have this all the time, but I assume that's why that's in place,
Yeah.
is to do it in an orderly fashion.
Go ahead, Luann.
John stated it the way I wanted, may be required to, and I know what you're saying. Some legislative bodies really need that. I just didn't see the need here because we just don't have those issues. We have orderly board meetings. If you want to put it in, I mean, why start to change the culture? The community is used to participating. I think some changes help us. This is just one that, why not leave this a little more open for our community so that they don't come and all of a sudden have to sign in when they never used to, and why do I have to now? When we don't have order problems, I would just, that's my thought. And I know this is just one piece, but I think I didn't know you were going to stop. I wanted to back up to B too, because I think the whole culture of this goes the wrong way if we're not going to allow the public to speak on anything but agenda items, which is what B states, which I wanted to take that part up. I don't know, you're going to finish C and then go back to B, or how do you want to?
Well,
I would like
Yeah.
to see, maybe required to, but it's certainly, I can live with it if you guys all want to register people.
But you
I can live with that, it's not the end of the world.
You don't make policies for what you know now. You try to anticipate things so that if something, a crisis or a change or a situation does come up, you're not scrambling to figure out how to handle it. So that having been said, I have no problem putting the word may in there so that if we do have an influx, which has happened from time to time over the years, that we can exercise that option to keep things orderly. And I also would prefer knowing that we're doing it with the intent of follow-up, that we have a written record so that there is an easier way to cross-check what was said in the recording as to how to reach somebody. And under those two circumstances, I have no problem with that particular one as long as we change it to may. I'd rather have it in there than have a situation that we're scrambling to figure out what to do.
Okay.
So my comment on that is, I don't have a problem with asking people to register, but my problem was more with the last part of it, upon their arrival at the meeting, because then that limits their ability to make a comment after somebody else has made a comment if they're not registered. So is there another way, is there another opportunity that they can register to speak if, let's say there were two people, and Eileen registered tonight to speak, and then there was a second person who had some other thoughts after Eileen spoke, but they weren't registered, so then they couldn't speak?
No, and I think that's what I said before, where if that did happen, they could just add their information after
But
the
it
fact.
says
I know
upon
what
their
you mean.
arrival at the meeting.
Now, all I would tell you, I mean, we can have, this is a great debate. I'm just trying to, that typical governmental bodies, this
Right.
is their policy, because if you have no idea how many people plan to speak, you're trying to, conduct business within a timely manner. So part of it is anticipating how many people plan to speak up front. I think that Stephanie's point is well made, that it's better to put something in anticipating what might be a hot button issue, just because it is because that's not a great place to be in, that all of a sudden you're creating policy. Like a school board, there was an article today in the weekly roundup for a school board that is quickly changing this policy because they all of a sudden are getting a lot of people attending their meetings. That's not a great place to be in, that you all of a sudden switch your policy because now you have a lot of hot button items. So I think to think it through, should there be that, would we, where can we live with it, no matter if we have nobody in the audience or 100 people in the audience, what's the medium ground that you can live with under both circumstances? Because the may, I would just ask you, is if we're deciding things are going and then all of a sudden we get a lot of people and now you start to engage that one, is that going to look like you're biased against a topic because now you're engaging that policy, and do you want to, see what I'm saying, versus a common routine that you always do?
Except I think that we know when we show up for a meeting, if there's 20 people out there or 3 in the back corner wearing Girl Scout uniforms. And we also know that things like taxes and referendum things and that kind of stuff are going to draw a crowd. So I think some of that in this smallish district is somewhat predictable. And I'm still in favor of maintaining an open culture of communication as opposed to language that might feel a bit stifling. If you want to, there's different ways of writing that too, so that you don't have to say upon their arrival. Like attendees who participate in the public portion of the meeting may be required to register during the, period.
Period. Didn't need to say that.
Yep.
Okay. So now we need to decide what we're going to do before we move forward.
Well, I think we should take a vote as to it the way it stands.
Just that.
All of it, or just that piece of it?
Just that piece, just say.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor of leaving
I
it
just
at?
want to clarify that. If we're voting, does that mean it's going to come forward? I mean, we're not really voting on it tonight.
No.
We are
Calling it
simply
straw poll.
recommending what will come forward in the policy. I just want
Yes.
to clarify
And
that.
inform
This is
them.
not the
Correct.
final vote.
No,
The
correct.
straw poll.
Yep.
Just taking a poll of
Thank
who
you.
would support it.
The straw poll.
I have other, I mean, do you want to do the whole thing or just this one?
Let's just work on
Let's
C
just
right
work
now.
on one at a
Okay.
time.
That's up right there.
Okay, so who's in favor of keeping it as it currently stands?
I am.
Aye.
Okay, so we will change it. Who is in favor of changing it if we do attendees may register, may be required to register?
Well, I still have a problem with the upon arrival part, but that changing that first language, I would support.
Okay.
I would be fine with it if we moved it to May.
May be required. And leave the rest. Nancy, you want to change the last part too?
I don't have any problem with May, but I
So we'll do
also
the-
don't have a problem with anybody filling out their information for follow-up, because I think that's a major, in the past, not complaint, but people got irritated that there wasn't any follow-up, and it makes it easier for follow-up, and I definitely see the merit in doing something like that. So a lot of times it's, well, no one ever told us this was gonna happen, we talked about it here, whatever happened with it, there you go. And I know Lisa's very, very good with following up, so are you, so.
Okay.
Okay, well then,
So maybe
the committee will address it and bring it back by next week, or by 2 weeks.
So are we going
You
back
got
to
that,
B?
Steph?
That,
Absolutely. Are we going back to B or are we going to D?
Yeah, what do you,
We'll go back
want
to
to go
B.
back to B?
I thought we should allow them, anyone to address the board on any issue, not just, but somewhere in our, once a month, at one of our, and if our regular meeting is our regular meeting, then I think the public should be able to address the board on any issue. And there are a variety of ways you can do that. It used to say that on our board agenda, and I apologize, it changed somewhere during my time, and I don't know how or why. I honestly, it was never intended, there was never discussion. I think it used to say current and future agenda items, which always opened the public to speak to us on an item, on any item. We can't discuss it anyway, and so I'm not suggesting that. So it would be anyone having a legitimate interest may participate during the public portion. It doesn't have to be just on an agenda item. I have seen, if this, again, I've seen board agendas where they have, this is on the agenda, and at the end of the meeting, you can speak to us on anything. But if a parent has a busing issue, or, if a community member wants to talk to us, when is that going to be allowed? That would be my question, if it's not allowed at a board meeting.
Well, we can't speak about an item that's not on the agenda.
I said that.
You can hear it.
We can
Pardon?
hear it.
We can hear it.
Hear it.
All I'm asking is for
Yeah.
you to say, these folks could
Right.
address us on any issue.
They can't, but we have a process in place now that's worked. And it
Yeah.
does work.
Used to be they could
They
address.
could come up and they could say, I would like at some point for the board to address such and such.
But Luann just said herself that changed a while ago.
Right.
You just said yourself that changed a while ago, being able to talk about any agenda item.
It used to be that the public always could address,
I just said, you said that it did,
but it was,
that has changed before this Neola. That practice of speaking about any agenda item changed in December of 2014 based on this procedure. But
I
I'm
don't
just
have the
saying-
exact date.
Okay, so either way, that's where we are now.
what I would
So-
like to see, regardless of what happened in the past, we don't need to argue about that. Let's just look at, can we put this in a way that allows the public to present an item to the board, regardless of what it is? There's good guidelines, it can't be personnel, and I mean, I like all the guidelines in here. But if they just want to come and address the board on any issue, they should be able to at our regular board meeting. And all the rest of these rules apply.
I agree.
So, one of the things that I have a concern about doing that is twofold. It's very easy to draw us into a discussion when we're not supposed to. So sometimes putting it to only the agenda items that are listed already, it protects us as well. The other idea is that usually when I've met people that have come up and we've been able to speak on any topic, they're expecting a give and take and they're expecting a dialogue. Because the follow-up question is, that I've heard later, is, well, why didn't you answer my question? The answer was, is because we couldn't, because it wasn't an agenda item. So for me, a couple of things that have to happen. We'd either have to give them another mechanism that would be more reliable to have that conversation, or make it very clear up front that, yes, you can ask us, for a future item, but you have to understand we're not going to have the discussion the night that you walk in. Because I think so much of this is just talking about open communication and giving them a way to be heard, but they're also expecting the dialogue to go with it that we can't necessarily provide immediately. So how do we clarify the expectation with those that come to us to speak on everything or anything that they need to, because they're obviously making the effort to come, so it's a serious matter. But how do we address the other concerns that are behind them coming here?
Can I respond? First of all, I think we used to have it that way. And when I was the president, I used to have to say, we can't respond. And that happened rarely, but we just addressed that. We do have to control that.
And that's
And
fine.
the public understood that. But they understood, we'll get back to you later. That was a real simple response. We can't discuss that at this time. Thank you for bringing your item up. We'll get back to you when we can. That's how I'd like to see it.
Any other
Agreed.
comments, Fry?
You can go ahead.
No.
So what, aren't you okay with this?
They wanted to not be restricted to current agenda items. So essentially, where we have the items for future consideration, they want that to be looped in as well. It can be current agenda items or items for future consideration.
No, I'm not actually saying that.
Well, yeah,
No. I said I've seen boards structured that way.
no,
Like,
all I'm saying is under this, future, they can propose things they'd like to be discussed in the future.
I'm really not saying that.
What are you saying then? If we can't discuss it during the meeting, they're bringing up a topic. They would expect that we want to discuss in the future.
Most of my experience with public doesn't have to be an agenda
It's an
item.
opinion.
It's simply they have an issue they want to talk to us about, and we have to get back to them about it. And I think it should be at the public portion of the meeting. That you don't make the public portion of the meeting be about just the agenda. That they can come and
And I'm
speak.
agreeing with you.
Okay.
I don't think you, so I didn't say add another section. I said essentially we're
Okay.
blending those two together so they can discuss in their portion the current agenda or ask that we discuss items in the future, whether it's on the agenda or having a conversation about it. Is that not what you're asking for? Because if they bring up a topic that's not on the agenda, they're going to want conversation down the road, right?
Not always.
Well, then what would they be
Not
looking
always.
for?
They might just want an answer to something.
Which is still,
doesn't have
that we
to be an
can't give
agenda
during the
item.
meeting.
Pardon?
We can't give during that
Right.
meeting. So
Right.
it's
We
something
would
that
follow
down the
it up.
line we're going to have to do.
But not necessarily
Not
as a board.
Right.
They may just want to come in and express an opinion. How many times have we heard that? And
Right.
they're not looking for a discussion, they're not looking
Sure.
for a future agenda
Right.
item. I think, I agree with Luann on this.
Okay, so Nancy and Quinn?
I think that at the committee of the whole meeting, it should be more open, that community members can come in and tell us things. Not at the business meeting, I don't think. Business meeting is really our meeting. The community of the whole meeting is more of a general meeting, right? More of a discussion meeting. So, so I would be happy to see it at the first meeting, that people could come in and voice concerns or whatever, but not at the business meeting. And I think that's how we used to do it in the past.
They could jump in anytime.
Right. Right, and it wouldn't have to be just in the, in that first audience comments. They would, if we're discussing this now, people in the audience could participate in the discussion with us. You know, we have seemed to kind of have lost that.
But that's a different issue than, it's not on the agenda. And so I'm still thinking there comes a time when something happens, or the board, or somebody in the community wants to come and address an item. It's not on the agenda.
I know, that's what I
not a
said,
free-for-all.
but it would be in one meeting, not in both meetings.
But yeah, just, I would like to see it at the public portion of
Right.
the meeting, not during.
But then I also said, we used to be able to engage the public in other agenda items, which we have seemed to have lost that.
Yeah, I'm disappointed that we've lost that. But yes, both of you. But I agree with Stephanie. What she pointed out was we need to be clear that if they bring up something that they want us to discuss, we just need to make sure they know that there won't be any discussion on it. And Luann usually covered that by saying, okay, so we can't discuss it because it's not on the agenda, but we appreciate your comments. I mean, that's, if it was something that they were looking for a response from, that a board response from.
Okay. We will work on B and C. D, participants must be recognized by the presiding officer and will be requested to preface their comments by an announcement of their name, address, and group affiliation, if and when appropriate.
Any
That's fine.
concerns
That's
about
what
that?
we do now.
Okay?
Okay.
E, each statement made by a participant shall be limited to 3 minutes duration unless extended by the board president.
I'd like to see us go back to 5 minutes unless shortened by the board president, which you have to do on those big meetings. But otherwise, 5 minutes
I agree.
in a regular meeting is not a big deal.
So you'd rather have it be 5 with the
All the
potential of
time.
shorten instead
Right.
of 3 with the
Right.
potential of extending?
Right?
Yes.
There's no need to crunch it on our
I
regular
think it's
board
easier to
meetings.
let people talk longer than tell them to stop talking.
Well, it's one of those things where you get 20 people in the audience and it's one of those busy meetings, hot button topic things, then you can state at the beginning, because of the level of interest in the subject matter and the number of participants that we've got, or potential participants that we have, we'll have to limit comments to 3 minutes instead of 5. And I think otherwise, you know, what will be the criteria for allowing folks to speak longer than 3 minutes? If we cut it down to 3 minutes, and if we do it the way it's written, what's our criteria for the board president to extend it? Because they have a lot to say.
Well, it's up to the board president if they are making sense, if they are talking cohesive. If they are just repeating themselves, then I would think that the board president would keep it to the 3 minute.
So what they should know ahead of time what they're allowed to say, and even if they're speaking, even if they're only going to take up 2 minutes, if they're just repeating the same thing over and over again, you might end up saying, okay, we understand. If you have something else, thank
We
you.
have to give them at least. So I think, I don't think we hold a stopwatch to anyone. I mean, I certainly don't. Yes.
We have, I think you've done some timing in the
I
past
did.
when it's been busy.
When we
I
had-
agree.
But I think that E also goes to the culture of trying to maintain that, I think it goes to try to maintain the open communication lines, the culture of open communication with the public, keeping it at 5. And it's much I think it's quite easy to make the statement based on expected participation that you'll be cutting it down to 3 minutes for everyone.
So if we've just said that, if we don't know that 20 people are going to talk, and we let the first 10 speak for 5 minutes, at that point, do you think it's going to be comfortable to say, okay, we're cutting it down to 3 now because people want to keep talking?
I think it'd be up to you whether you want to do that in the middle or state it at the beginning of the meeting.
Without signing in, how will you know how many people are
Exactly.
going to
I mean,
participate?
You don't want people to sign in. You
I'd
don't
say
want
it's-
people to sign in, and then, but you want us to be able to say, well, there are a lot of people here, so I think without going and asking each individual person, hey, are you going to talk tonight? Are you going to talk tonight? Are you going to talk tonight? Sometimes we know a group of people are going to come.
Yep.
And under those circumstances, you might require them to sign in, and you might limit comments to 3 minutes, even if you don't know who's allowed to talk. If it's a large crowd, you could do that. I see that as totally a reasonable approach.
I think it's completely manageable doing it 5, having your option to cut it down to 3, and I think it's completely manageable. It should be easy.
So you want an option to give them 5 minutes, but to give them an option to cut them at 3?
Yeah.
Oh, I think that's ludicrous.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, I say you
No.
set it to
Yeah.
5 minutes,
You said it at 5 minutes.
and you could say unless reduced by the board president.
Unless shortened, in which case we have a large crowd and you got to shorten.
Yeah, you
Listen,
say,
You guys want to keep it at 3 minutes.
change the wording to 5 minutes duration unless shortened by the board president. That's what I would do.
Straw vote, who is in favor of
Let me,
keeping it?
let me just clarify. The only reason I thought 5 minutes is because it's hard to get your points across in 3 minutes. And when we have a crowd, and sometimes, not always, when we have a crowd, do it. Get your point across, because there's going to be a lot of people talking. That's the only reason I would like to keep it at 5. Because I think in some cases, people need a little, that gives them just a little more time to clarify their points. I'm not trying to pick a fight with anybody.
But
I
it
just-
gives
That's why.
unless extended by the board president. So there is that out.
Right.
So it does tries to keep people on point, keep order, keep it going. The more I go through these rules, I see why they're there. They're to keep order in a large group. So I am for the way it's written.
So it's per item, you get 3 minutes if you read it. So if there's a bunch of items on there, you could technically be up there for a while.
So let's do the straw poll again for as written.
Who's 3 minutes? 5? Okay. So,
And I've seen some board meetings that have a set amount of time in the beginning, so they don't necessarily limit people, but they limit the comments to 20 minutes or whatever. So.
I think what Stephanie said a while ago now speaks volumes that these are meant as to anticipate the worst case scenario, not for the every single meeting when one person wants to talk like tonight. These are worst case scenarios so that we have safeguards in place. Sorry.
You announce that at every meeting. You say, limit your comment to 3 minutes. So I mean, that's going to be the rule, not the exception.
Correct.
Right, and the exception is
That's
still
the rule.
provided for because it's saying unless extended by the board president. That's already there.
Sure.
So the
So you will-
extension's built in.
You will allow them to go beyond 3 minutes, but if you've already told them, I'm telling you, they're going to come up to this podium and they're going to limit their comments because they think they only have 3 minutes. They're not even going to try. So I'm disappointed, but
Well,
that's
let's
okay.
look, Eileen
Move
got
on.
probably way over 5 minutes, but she was making a point, she was on point, she was organized. There was no problem there.
She got away with it.
Even at 5 minutes, she was well over 5 minutes. So I don't think there was an issue here. So when we do have larger groups, it gives us the flexibility to follow order. So,
And by the same token, if you look at a large group and say, yep, we need everybody to sign in, or if you look at a large group and say, yep, we got to limit it to 3 minutes, you can look at the group and say, yep, we'll make your comments 5 minutes tonight. It's just a different way of judging the audience.
To me, that's an argument for going with 5 minutes and being able to cut it down to 3.
I agree.
So
Right,
we'll keep
we-
it at
That's
the
okay,
three.
just move on.
We'll keep it at the
You're
3
right,
minutes.
sorry.
So on to F.
no participant may speak more than once on the same topic.
So there's a problem with that, with what Nancy brought up, on the meeting of the whole, committee of the whole. People could chime in, and they could, in a sense, have part of the discussion as opposed to just speaking a piece. And this doesn't allow them to do that.
Yeah, because I think we're going to keep it confined to the comments at the beginning instead of this discussion throughout the meeting.
I disagree with that concept.
So, anyone else with this topic, speaking more than once? Okay. G,
And they'll only be able to speak at the beginning of the meeting, even the
as
committee
in
of the
now,
whole.
yes.
This is just for the board meetings, not committee meetings.
No, committee of the whole.
No, this is just for regular meetings of the board.
Mhm.
We are not talking committee meetings here.
Not committee meetings,
No.
no.
Right. Sorry, it's clarifying.
All right,
Committee of
G.
the whole. Hold on.
Well, is the committee of the whole a regular board meeting, or
It
is
is
the
a
committee of the whole a
Oh,
committee
right.
meeting?
It
It's
is,
not an actual committee meeting. It's one of the standard board meetings.
Okay, then we need to be reworking some of the other committee numbers that I have some questions about as well. Some of our other policy numbers that I have questions about too.
Okay. So, G.
participants shall direct all comments to the board and not to staff or other participants.
Any other? Okay.
H, the board/committee will not hear complaints of school personnel. The board president or chairperson will reflect any such comments to the superintendent for follow-up pursuant to the applicable district procedure. I, all statements shall be directed to the presiding officer. No person may address or question board members individually. J, the presiding officer may, 1, interrupt, warn, or terminate a person. Nice.
Sorry.
Hard enough the way it is, you're rolling it now. Interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement when the statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, obscene, or irrelevant. 2, request any individual to leave the meeting when that person does not observe a reasonable decorum. I got bifocals here, it's crazy. Request the assistance of law enforcement officers in the removal of a disorderly person when that person's conduct interferes with the orderly progress of the meeting.
So where are our law enforcement officers?
We have to call them.
Yeah, we have to call our SRO.
Okay.
4, call for a recess or an adjournment to another time when the lack of public decorum to interfere with the orderly conduct of the meeting as to warrant such action. K, the portion of the meeting during which the participation of the public is invited shall be limited to 20 minutes unless extended by a vote of the board. L, recording, filming, or photographing the board open meeting is permitted. Recording, filming, or photographing the board's closed session is only permitted pursuant to bylaw 0167-.2 closed session. The person operating the equipment should contact the district administrator prior to the board meeting to review possible placement of the equipment and must agree to abide by the following conditions. Do we want this?
Why would we want that, our closed session
Right.
recorded or filmed or,
Yeah.
Photograph.
right?
It has to do, if you look at the policy, I think it allows for, there's some exceptions to closed policy or closed session that it might have to do with personnel issues that they might want it, but the board has to allow that in case of that. Not every closed session, if you look at what the state statute is pursuing.
So this is mirroring the statute.
Yeah, if you look at the other 167.2, is it? Let's go and look at what that statement is now. Yeah, so it relates to consider requests for confidential written advice from the Ethics Board under State Statute 19.462 or any other county or municipal ethics board under consideration. So they're rare, it's a state statute thing in which there could be a rare consideration to have a closed session based on personnel requirements. It's not a common practice, but it's in accordance with the state statute in which you would do that. That's not every closed session.
So it has to be in there by law.
That way we can comply with, with some legal requirement without breaking our policy.
Do I need to read 1, 2, and 3?
No. No.
So,
Well, but it says, it doesn't say it's permitted for some reason, is it? Oh, pursuant to bylaws.
167.2.
Yeah, and then 167, it lists all the state statutes and all the stuff. It's 167.2 is closed session, and so within there, it talks about in which a municipality or person might have that, so, yeah.
Right.
so we are gonna work on B and C between now and the next meeting? Okay. Next policy?
6235 on fund balance.
Okay, so this is more of a philosophy change Slaughter on that, correct? Yeah.
Well, actually, I
Mike?
don't mind, no, but part of the discussion around this one at policy had to do with the current percentage being 15. And at the time it was done, that's a little antiquated, and that now our understanding has been that there actually isn't percentages listed anymore, right, Mike? That they don't necessarily.
Yeah, so I pulled 6 different school policies just to kind of get a feel for what's the just for 6 that really came to my mind. Franklin, Mosquito, Norway, Mequon, Thiensville, Arrowhead, Greenfield, and Greendale. 4 do not mention any percentages, and 2 do. And the
so,
2 that do is 15%.
And part of this too is that knowing that we're gonna have obligations, whether it's a bad year for claims, that we might need to keep a bigger reserve than 15% might actually net us. So that's part of the reason why this was brought forth, to have a little bit of a bigger discussion about. And now I'm gonna let the rest of the background be part of Mike's job.
Well, I think 15% was just a common number that was used quite often by DPI for a while. It was, they used to list on their website what was their good, whatever that would mean, fund balance. That's why you see 2 other districts that also have 15%. Every district is different. Every district has different needs. So to see 15% across all these other districts simply means that it was a number that was just commonly used in the past because DPI said it might be a good number. DPI themselves have moved away from that practice. They don't suggest any percentage for any district. They go more by 3 basic guidelines. You want to avoid short-term borrowing, you want to have it there for emergency purposes, and you want to have a good fund balance for bond rate. You should do whatever you need to go and borrow. That's the guidelines that DPI lays out. And so the question of whether we want the 15% there or not is really a question of what the board, the detail that the board wants to see. I could see going away with the 15% and having administrative guidelines in the background that lay out, hey, if we want to avoid short-term borrowing or, to have 0 short-term borrowing, we really need something like 28%. We want to have an additional 5% to cover short-term, emergencies. We want an additional 5% to cover a year in which health insurance claims are up there instead of, are out of whack from what we normally see being self-funded. So I can see that being in the background of the policy, but again, that's up for discussion as far as what's, the 15% means nothing to us. 15% is no magical number. It means nothing.
So that doesn't determine bond ratings or anything, the 15%? I thought if you
No.
start dropping below that, you start.
It depends on, so our fund balance, let's use real numbers, right? Our fund balance right now is around 28%. You still borrow $2 million for short-term cash flow in December. Does that mean because it's 28% that it's really good? Well, we're still short-term borrowing, so a bond rating agency might go, well, you're still short-term borrowing. Do you know what I mean? That 15% does nothing for you because you're still short-term borrowing anyway. So it's more based on those guidelines of what they see actually happening in reality versus a hypothetical number that's out there. If we would go below 15%, that would put us a little below 4.2 million. And so I don't think this district has ever been that low. So right now we're at 6.7. 4.2 would be extremely low. And start to talk about short-term borrowing costs are relatively high, even in a low interest rate environment like we currently have.
So what do you think? You think we should have a number there? You think it should be, if so, do you think it should be higher?
If there would be a number, the other problem is if there is a number there, what does it mean if you go below it? What sort of teeth is there if you would go below it from the board standpoint? We would mandate the budget to replenish that, or what if that's in a tight year in which you can't replenish it? I would, John, if you're asking me, I would put administrative guidelines behind the board policy to say, here's where our ideal percentages would be. 32% or whatever the number is would cover short-term costs. 5%, 5%, 10%, whatever that backbone is. Whereas the policy itself, we're keeping more in the scope of being broad. I would say we want to ensure these 3 things right in the very first paragraph. We want to minimize short-term borrowing. We want to maximize our bond rating, and we want to cover unforeseen expenditures. That is the purpose of fund balance. To have the 15% in there, for one, we don't really know what that means if we go lower. So what if we're at 12%? Whether we're at 12% or 15% or 18%, it would probably still be discussion by the board about how we proceed moving forward anyway.
Well, I think that could be the idea behind the percent. Remember, we're talking about, well, you're here now, you know, there's no guarantee we have, and we know you and how you work and that kind of stuff. I mean, we're trying to set these for,
Yep.
you know, several years. So there might be some value in having some number in there triggering the administration to have to come to the board to ask to go below.
That's a great point.
That could be the benefit of a number.
And so just keep in mind, as that 15% is there, every year that expenditures rise, right, as is usually the case, that 15% actually makes that number smaller and smaller. Is that right? In 50 years, when there's inflation and we're at 100 million, you know, a budget, that 15% really becomes a smaller and smaller portion.
But if you look at how it's written, it's a goal for the district to have at least 50%. And then it goes on to say that, remember, year to year, there's ebbs and flows for unseen circumstances. So I see no reason to change it.
I agree.
And then just do the administrative guidelines.
Yeah, regardless, I would put something behind it, yep.
But
Regardless.
Nancy made a good point to me that if it goes below 5, we ask the business services manager,
I was gonna say, at least give them a timeout or something.
Yeah,
No.
Oh, you're pretty serious?
No, it's timeout.
Open his checkbook.
Timeout is he's walked off the property.
Got it.
Just so, you know, that's the unwritten rule there, just so you know.
Yeah, Kathy, don't
So-
write that down.
Board
That's,
procedure behind the
yeah,
policy.
that's where that board, the board procedure comes into play.
But Mike's point is well taken. The 15%, given when, historically, when that number was in there, it's meaningless now.
It's a number that does not benefit this district, correct?
And if anyone reading our policies or thinking about our finances says, oh, great, 15%, they're adhering to that, but it's meaningless, and it's not looking out for the public welfare. And it's not looking out for the duty we have to be a guardian of the funds. It's not well managed to put a bad number in there.
So it would be essentially taking out to be at least 15%, replacing that with to align with administrative guidelines.
Something like that, or if you'd prefer something a little bit tighter for the future, that you've got a concrete percentage in there to look at, then we need to be flexible and review it periodically to make sure that whatever percentage is in that policy makes sense.
Sure.
But at the present time, 15 is not a good number, so we should change it. We just have to figure out what to.
I can see the value in having a good number in there so that it triggers administration to have to come to the board if they foresee needing to dip below that,
So you say
which policy allows.
20%?
But a good number could
We're at
change
28 right now.
year to year.
We can change it year to year.
So why do we want to do that?
Well, then put administrative guidelines in there so you don't have to change it, but don't put a bad number in a policy like that.
Why is it a bad number?
Because it doesn't mean anything. So if we have financial needs, or if we have a continued short-term borrow, and we think we're okay because we're at 15% and we're not,
In other words, 15% doesn't do any of these things that are in the top paragraph. It doesn't minimize our short-term borrowing. It does not maximize our bond rating. It does cover unforeseen expenditure needs. So it covers one of the three.
And it goes back to what Mike said before, we're at 28%, so short-term borrowing. So 15% isn't the number. If we're going to put a number, it's not the number, it needs to be higher. Because if we're at 28%, we're not hitting it, by the time we get down to 15%, we're in pretty rough shape. If you're bumping it up to 20, 25, doing administrative guidelines, whatever it is, that gives us some more lag time to say, okay, we can react instead of waiting till the last estimate. And to John's point of where we're going for the future, maybe 20, 25%, I don't know. Maybe that's the answer?
Yeah, and so 20% would be a trigger at $5.6 million fund balance. 20% would trigger, whatever that trigger is, a board discussion, hey, we are below our board policy number.
So then would 20% do all three of the items?
No, we're at 28% right now, and it doesn't do all three.
Right,
So
so
we have
there's
60.
another bad number in that respect, right?
Yeah,
So we have 6.7 million, and yet we still end up needing to short-term borrow 2 million?
yes. You're talking about a fund balance that you probably want around 35 to 38% if you want to avoid short-term borrowing. And if that's what's going to be in the board, in actual policy and not administrative guideline, the question is then what do you do as a board? What,
So we borrowed, what, 200,000 or 2
we
million?
borrowed 2 million,
And what was the interest on that?
1 point,
Dollars
2
and cents.
point, well, it ended up costing us 2,200.
From my point of view, that's the cost of doing business. Meaning that we can't have 40% tied up in a fund balance. First of all, how are we gonna get there? And then second, how are we gonna maintain that?
We
Right.
have 16 million.
Well,
Yeah.
right.
So
Times change.
if people want a number, Stephanie and Mike, what number would you be comfortable putting in there? Just as a starting point. I mean, obviously, if we're at,
So
if
I'd
we're
like to
saying
preface that I'm not
35%.
comfortable with any number in the actual policy itself. I'll preface it with that.
I get it.
If we're gonna say a number, I'd have to look at what the number would be to short-term borrow. That, to me, that would be 35%, which we're not
Okay.
there.
So we really need to decide if we want to include a number or if we don't,
Right.
right?
And
That's the ultimate decision we need to make now.
I'm curious as to how high the number has to be to eliminate 2 of the 3.
Yeah,
That's,
Yeah.
and not like Quinn said, short-term borrowing ends up being the cost of doing business. Then, so we don't have to tie up 40%,
Yeah.
you know, then if we eliminate 2 of the 3, and eliminate well, so we can maximize, we can cover 2 of 3, maximizing bond rating and cover
Yeah.
senior expenditure expenditure needs.
Sure.
What's the number?
Okay, so
I'm curious.
straw vote, who wants to include a number?
a percentage or a dollar figure?
Just a percentage, an actual figure, not administrative guidelines. Who wants to include a percentage? Who wants to reference administrative guidelines and have a subsequent document that can be revised on an annual basis?
I'd rather do that because we can discuss what those guidelines are and make it reasonable for us.
Okay,
Well, if it's in policy, we could review it annually as well.
yeah. So
It's just a question
we'll
of
look to change to be at least 15% to align with administrative guidelines.
This might be an example where you would do what I talked about before and call them policy guidelines, because this, right? I mean, this
Yeah.
might be one of those policies that the
Sufficient.
board actually would approve, because I don't think, you know,
I agree
where I
with
talked
that.
about that?
I agree
Yeah.
with
Because
that.
administrative, we would not feel comfortable alone at something, and this way it would, it's sort of putting it in policy, but understanding that it's a guideline that you could review annually, that would be part of the intent. That's sort of, this is an example of one of those policies.
Right, especially where short-term borrowing. we're
That the
comfortable
board should
with
be making that
then.
decision,
Okay, so
absolutely.
policy guidelines. Okay, Kathy? Okay, comfortable?
So at this point, this doesn't have to come back to the policy committee, correct? But it would be part of a discussion when we set the guidelines.
Correct.
Well, it is gonna have to come, because we're gonna have to change policy.
We haven't voted on it
This
yet.
is the policy.
Somewhere, I mean, right, somewhere along the, this is.
Before the
this is not gonna
28th,
look
it's got to
good.
get modified, right?
All true.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't necessarily but to this committee, as a whole.
the board
Yes.
has to make a decision on the, okay, all right. Any other questions on that? Stephanie, Mike, are you comfortable? Okay. 6320 purchasing.
Okay, so this one came up, and hopefully for once and for all, we'll settle the age-old question is, if it's in the budget, do we have to separately approve it because it hit a dollar figure? Or if it's not in budget, when, you know, we've had that discussion around purchasing in items before, So there was a recommendation to change this to also raise the limit and not make it a 15,000, but Mike, we said 25.
Yeah, there's really gonna be this policy lays out 3 levels. First of all, anything that's gonna be, any single item above $5,000 needs to have 3 quotes, period. It needs to be backed up by 3 quotes. Current policy, there was something with $15,000. The thing that Stephanie's talking about is whether that was in or out of the budget. There seemed to be some question, at least this past year, of if it's above $15,000, but it's in the budget, it doesn't have to go to the board. If it's above $15,000 and it isn't in the budget, that definitely has to go to the board, and where did that line up? This particular policy states that we would move that $15,000 to $25,000 as long as it's within budget allocations.
Now,
Yep.
but let's have the conversation here we had at the committee level
Yep.
about what's a budget, what's in the budget, what's
Yeah.
out of the budget, what is that?
Yeah. So,
We're all looking away.
so this is a great question. So, the detail, the most detail that the board sees is the detail that you see tonight. So if right, you're gonna be.
In a budget.
In a budget, right? So if I said to you, that tractor is in, you tell me, Luann, if that tractor is in or out of the budget, you would have no clue. You see numbers, right? And you see dollar amounts allocated at these certain Woodford codes. So there's always discussion then about whether this is actually in or out of the budget because of the detail that is shown forth, right? The board has a director of business services to know the detail of what is in the budget and whether things are in or outside of the budget. So what this policy would say is, to a certain degree, and what we had discussed at the committee level was, with this $25,000 amount, you would have to see items that are, in our policy we call it the 2-digit function line item. It simply means, is the expenditure actually, is it outside of the budget and being used for a different purpose than what those dollar amounts were intended to be? So for example, in this policy, if something is going to go outside of our budget allocation, let's say science wants to have $30,000 in test tubes, whatever, and we don't have the money in science, but it's in social studies, the board would have to approve that with this detail right here to say, hey, that's not in our budget, it's allocated somewhere else, we're okay with moving those dollars or using those dollars in a different allocation. If the purchase is above $25,000 and we had budgeted, there's enough in that allocation to purchase those $30,000 in test tubes without going beyond that science budget, this policy would say the superintendent has the okay in which to do that. Am I rambling, or does that make sense?
No, you're good.
So this kicks up that amount from 15 to 25. It is specific, though, now that's saying that 25 has to be within the allocation. If it's outside of what the specific allocation was intended for, that's when it would come to the board. Anything above $25,000, whether it's in the budget or not in the budget, in this policy, would come to the board. Anything above $50,000 would have to go to a competitive RFP process.
What's the number if it's not part of the allocation?
It's still, if it's not part of,
I mean, to me, that's the real, I understand what you're saying.
Yep.
It's, we budgeted we budgeted $26 million, so $30,000 of test tubes is in there.
yeah, but what about
So,
20?
But you point out the very critical thing, allocations. Okay, so if the science department's allocated, in high school, is allocated $30,000, and you want to spend
It is, but here
27 on-
2-digit. We'd have to go 1-digit. Sorry, John.
That's all right. If the science department's allocated $30,000 for their annual budget in the high school, and they want to spend $27,000 on test tubes, I could see the point that, provided that's within their allocation, that's something we've been missing. I think it's very important. But what's the number for being outside of the allocation?
So the
can they
next
spend-
line,
Can they spend $15,000 if
Yeah.
it's not part of their their department budget? Let's say they've already done their
To
$27,000
the,
in test tubes.
yep,
And they
so,
want to spend $5,000
yep,
on Petri dishes.
yep. So this policy would say that's all purchases, no matter if it's $1 or it's $24,999, is still, there's an approval process, right, at the building level and then to the Director of Business Services. So there's still that approval process to go through. In that instance, it would be the same approval process that is always in place.
So they could spend up to their maximum allocation, or they could spend at least in chunks of $25,000, they could spend up to their maximum allocation, without it needing to, us needing to know about it. And then if they go beyond their allocation, we still don't need to know about it.
Well, let me just look at this next line. It says, for purchases of more than $5,000, the board must give prior approval for all purchases, equipment, materials, and services when the purchase was not included in the budget.
In the budget or in the allocation?
I might be using these terms the same.
Are you intending to?
Yeah,
Because to me, the allocation was important. You know, the budget is $26 million.
yeah. I'm lost in vocabulary.
Department budget instead of budget as a whole.
Well, that's what he meant by allocation, right?
So it goes back to that facilities thing.
Yeah, talk more about and what we.
So,
I'm, yeah,
You-
allocation and budget, I guess I'm not
How would you
finding the
slice up?
difference.
You're referring to budget as individual department budgets?
Well, that's why here, this woofer two-digit function line item is important, and I know that's like getting down in the weeds. Sorry, under general provisions, lines 1 and 2 is kind of where we are. So I'm fine with outlining anything we want to outline, because I think as long as we can all agree on an intent here, I'm good with in what direction the board wants to go on this. I think we need to define maybe the difference between allocation and budget, so we're all on the same page as what that means. And then at that point, what sort of purchases do you want to have come in front of you, the board, okay? So when I think about budget allocations, well, let's just start with budget allocations. I'm looking at as specific, with this two-digit function, which gets pretty specific, which is really almost by department. Okay, social studies, science, anything else, okay? Elementary, whatever you want to call it. For the next line then, with the budget, for purchase of more than $5,000, must give prior approval for all purchases when the purchase was not included in the budget. So again, they refer to here the two-digit function line item. So to me, as long as the $25,000 there's space in the budget, in the budget allocation to fit that $25,000 in, it is the superintendent who can authorize that, or designee, to allow for that purchase to occur. If it is going to be outside of the allocation, this is how I would think about it. If it's outside of the allocation, in other words, it wasn't budgeted for, to me that's the same thing in my mind. Anything over $5,000 must go to the board.
So you're saying budget and allocation essentially as synonymous terms? right?
That's how I view it.
So,
but
and
I'm
what
just-
you mean by that is a two-digit function line item?
Todd?
What's that? Yeah, like right now?
Yeah.
You want to talk right now?
Yeah.
So, but.
Or whatever detail, yeah.
So
Yeah.
what you're referring to then is the two-digit, if it goes beyond, outside, more than 5,000 outside that two-digit line item, the WUFAR, whatever.
Yep,
Is
yep.
that two-digit line item, is that two digits just identifying the line item? And is that essentially something like the high school science budget?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
has its own
Yeah.
two-digit line item?
Two-digit is 120. Oh, am I thinking too specific? I'm
Here-
going
So
too
here's where I
specific.
think we talked
I'm
about
going
at
too
policy,
specific.
you are, I think you need 3. Here's where I think at policy committee we were. We said if there's an instructional budget, if you think about the detail that you see as a board tonight, there's an instructional budget, there's a transportation, there's a facility, think about the level that you see. I don't care if science and social studies, because that's being overseen by multiple administrators. If science has, they got their textbooks half price and social studies had to pay more, between science and social studies at the district level, to me, that's with instructional services in terms of that. If Todd got a half price sale on cleaning supplies, and so his budget had enough money, and now math textbooks were more expensive, and we took something out of facilities to give to instruction, that better come to the board at over $5,000, because that for me, so is that 3 digits?
That's 2.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about, when you're taking it out of a whole different area, like facilities to
Yep.
instruction, or those bigger areas like that. Between science and math, or Hales Corners and Edgerton, that's really irrelevant in terms of the level of the detail that the board would see. So Lori got a great deal on chairs, Chris did not, and so that's the same piece of it in terms of the budget. It didn't change the overall amount that the board allocated to elementary furniture, let's just say. But if you're gonna pull out of a whole area to give to, whatever it is, athletics to whatever, then I think that needs to be brought to the board over $5,000, because that was a significant change in whatever that was. Does that make sense?
So
That
we,
presumes
yeah.
that the people losing the money because they got a good deal, they're okay with it.
Well, I was giving that as a simplistic example.
I understand.
Well, the people though, we can't treat each, yes, it does assume that, yes.
So, can I, either I'm confused or whatever, but it used to be, anything outside the budget, large purchases over 15,000 came to the board.
Nope,
That's,
and that wasn't, so I'll give you examples.
now, maybe there were rules, but
So I think this is what we talked about at policy committee, that policy was super unclear. We would spend $100,000 on technology every year, and that did not come in the board in front of a purchase, ever. What does in the budget mean? Like, we would never do anything that's not in the budget.
once in a while, like a truck would break down, remember? That's how I saw it. Anyway, I'm fine with
Yeah.
whatever you want to change, but
Yeah.
I think 5,000 is a pretty low bar. I would prefer to go to 15,000 or even 25,000. I would prefer
Yep,
larger
yep.
numbers.
And that's why we are moving the
I'm fine with
15 to
that.
25 in terms of that number. I agree, yeah.
I'm fine with that. And this is more clear.
We're trying to clarify what it means in the budget. That's the phrase that I think we spent most of our time on. What does it mean to be in the budget? Because we are not gonna like borrow money to make any expenditure, so what does it mean to be in the budget?
Correct. And, but I don't want us to be approving all these large expenditures at the budget, at the board meeting, if they're in the budget already. I don't, even things over 25, I hope we're not starting to bring all these items that are already in the budget to the board to be approving those. I look at our maintenance, our capital, are we gonna be approving every new thing that comes?
Well, we're doing that tonight.
Pardon?
We were told that we had to do that last year, and that's what's coming in front of you tonight, anything over 15,000.
Also, I think that I'd like to see the numbers go up. I would like to be notified. I don't mind that if we really need accountability. I also like that we continue to look at bidding, this lays out that kind of language. I think that's all.
Based on your
I can live with lower numbers, but I kind of prefer higher.
based on explanation of the budget allocations and the 2-digit, 3-digit stuff, I can understand raising it to 25, but I do like the 5,000 in there if you're, just so we know that because we've approved the budget, now you're changing it in a sense. Not that the total price is still, the total amount is still the same, but since you're changing from what's been approved, I can see bringing it to us. So I can live with the way it's written and you can.
We had a lot of conversations, so anybody else who can remember it. Kevin, do you remember? I'm trying to
You're
remember.
recommending this policy as written, correct? Or are you recommending change?
I am, we just want to make sure we're clear
Because we
on
did
what
change the
these-
threshold
this
from 15 to
vocabulary means.
25.
Yeah.
It's a higher threshold than the board has seen. That was we wanted to make sure, and it also was not clear to us in the past. We had a lot of conversation. I think board members said, what does in the budget mean?
Exactly.
And it's never been
Right.
clarified, because we got caught last year, a couple things about what is or isn't in the budget. That's why the furniture for personalizing learning came forward to the board this year, which had a lower price tag than it did last year when it didn't, we just need some direction on what it means and what the board wants to see, because I don't think it's been consistent in practice.
since we don't get into the weeds of the budget, we have to rely on you
Correct.
to know what your line items are.
Correct.
And then you will determine is it or not in the budget.
And this gives us that guidance.
Mhm.
Right, correct.
Okay. All right, so everybody's comfortable with it as written? Yep, okay, let's go. So the next one is Citizens Advisory Committees, 9140.
I think we just talked about the, anybody can jump in.
Yeah, so it was,
I'd like to comment. I think this is a great policy. I really like the
Yep.
changes you made. Having been the middle of controversy for how the last one was, I think this really makes a lot of sense. Have the superintendent
Yep.
take care of what, I have no problem with this. I mean, in terms of her role or his role, I like how this is written.
I think, I'm trying to remember what we, I think it
Discussion
went, was like the board president
President.
selects versus, and this was more of a, yeah, right? Remember? Yeah, right, yeah. Well, and that's why we just thought,
yeah, so
That's
this
the
is,
part we discussed in the thing about who would be selecting the members, and I know you just said that, and we had, that was the main part of the
Yep.
discussion.
yeah.
we just
so-
wanted to bring it forward because it is a significant change from where it was before. And we wanted all the board members to be aware of that.
If I'm not comfortable with the old policy, I can do it.
And so that's why, so,
Mhm.
any other questions about it?
Good. Unless I'm fine with it.
Okay, so that addresses the 4 items listed here. Any other questions before we move on? Yes.
I do. I had submitted a list of questions and policies that I would like to address. Unfortunately, I didn't get responses, and it's all kind of till right at the last minute. I do have something I'd like to ask questions about. Okay?
Okay. And this has been shared to all the other board members, so you have it in your hand. So again, were you going to go through all of them or just?
Regarding that, I had a question, because Quinn sent out multiple emails,
Mhm.
Lisa sent out emails, we had, where you could review these, send all your questions, they were sent out multiple times. We had 2 policy committee meetings regarding them. Why are we just doing this now? This was the whole point of having the emails ahead of time and doing everything before. So we came here, we could just go through the few that everybody had questions on that we were unsure of during those meetings.
I have no problems having some discussion in front of the public on policy that affects all of us.
I'm not saying that, I mean, it was public, anybody could come to these policy meetings, it was posted, it was there. We had all this discussion, we went through every single policy for those of us that were there. And everybody on the board had ample opportunity to submit questions on the policies, to come there and discuss them, to email Lisa, to email Kathy, Jonathan, whoever. So we're backtracking, the whole point was to have this done before, to come here. And for those of you who couldn't make it, you could look on your things, submit your questions, I know I did. For the one, I went through every single, 2 or 3 of the series and submitted my questions and concerns to Lisa, they got addressed, and finally got.
So
Well,
I
but
guess-
it is on the agenda to discuss
Sure.
policies, so if there's a board member who wants to discuss some policies, I think we should have a discussion on the policies.
I'm just curious, I'm just looking, part of the discussion was looking for a why on it.
Not everybody has the same kind of, time limitations or lack thereof or whatever, or at least in the same kind of timing as everybody else. So this is an opportunity to discuss things that somebody was not able to discuss previously.
Get that on this, the whole.
So,
Coming prepared
yeah.
with what we're supposed to do is what's following.
Well, but I think the questions on this list are pretty simple to
Yeah, and that's why I think.
discuss. I mean, it's not about
No,
policy
yeah.
line by line by
But my
line,
whole
so
thing
it's
is,
general questions.
We went through all of this already.
Well, but that was in a policy committee, and that doesn't mean that everybody attends a policy
That's not
committee.
true, but everybody got an email saying, here are all the policies, please submit questions, please let us know, and send a reminder. If you have any questions on these policies, please email them to Lisa or Jonathan or whoever.
Right, but it didn't say, and you can't do it after this date, and it's on the agenda tonight to discuss, so let's discuss these questions.
Okay, so I think, and I agree with you. And to Quinn's point at the beginning, thank you to those that were involved in that process of attending the meetings, of reading ahead of time, submitting questions, going back and forth, because I know it was a lot of work to get that done. So what I'll ask is, we have this list. Can we, instead of going through each individual one, can you highlight the ones that you think are the most, or that aren't grammatical? Highlight the ones that you think are most important with it? Okay, so let's just do that. Okay, then let's just do it.
I haven't had a chance to read all the responses, but I've gotten a few, and so those I got a lot of answers. I don't want to take more time for the
So
ones
it's-
I got answers to.
All right.
There's real, I have some real concerns.
So
about some of these
which one?
Let's
Let's,
go through them. Let's see. Bear with me here. 140, this is kind of a minor thing, but I'll just point to, sometimes the language says that they're going to get copies of 142.7. I mean, I would just prefer that we say access to, but I'm not even, that's not biggie to me on 147, 2.7. That would just be my suggestion, because it's not, if we write policies we can't follow, we're not getting copies to people anymore, why not just fix them so that they are legitimate, that we can do it? That was one suggestion I had.
okay. So what's next?
And there's other places too where it's,
So is
but
there,
we'll get to those.
but is there value in actually having us stick to the policy versus just removing it because we're not sticking to it? It seems like that's what we did with 187R. It went away because we weren't sticking to it.
Well, 142.7, all I was asking was under EC, this was the language access to, that would be in people copies, that's all.
And John, to that point, 142.7 is the new policy.
I'm looking at
187R, that's a former policy. So two different discussions. Because we haven't even put these in place yet.
using
So,
that as an example.
okay.
You know, that just
Got it.
because we're not doing it, it doesn't mean we should just, okay, well, we're not complying with this, so let's just remove it. Instead, maybe we should
Okay.
comply with it.
Okay, next.
Does that mean that the committee's going to consider that, or you're just dropping it?
Well, let's get through the ones that you want to discuss. Because, I mean, I'm not hearing a rounding support for making that change, so. Okay.
144.1A, the board has not approved these activities in the past. I suggest expenses are reimbursed. It said something here that board approved.
144.1.
I don't think that we should have any.
Oh, you got to do them.
Compensation. Number A, expenses will be reimbursed only for activities authorized by the board. I mean, I've gone to activities not authorized by the board and submitted expenses for that, so then I would be breaking this policy. Just other than WASB events, other education. So it'd be my suggestion to just take out.
That policy actually is different than the one you have, because we received the update from Neola, and that's one of the marked policies that was really updated.
So the hard
So
copy.
the hard copy was created before the updated copy was created.
But
So what you really need to look at is the marked copy of that policy.
Is that?
Online.
So it's online.
Which
The marked
one,
copy.
144.1?
144.1.
It corrects that, we can
It
move on.
doesn't individually list.
It's still there. Still
Is it
says
still there?
expenses will be reimbursed only for activities authorized by the board.
Okay.
So, to that point, it would be if a board member on their own went and attended a conference, incurred expenses for it, they could just come back in and request reimbursement for it?
It has to be related to duties serving on the board.
see 144.
That's because it's a marked policy.
It's not expenses. You went to that, and the board didn't approve that. So if you go to a legislative event, maybe you want to sort of make it expenses, but the board doesn't approve that. I think that's just a little too specific.
The board does, the board approves it at each meeting when we approve expenditures. I mean, it could just be related to that. I mean, we retroactively approve a lot of expenditures, right?
But it wasn't prior authorized by the board,
Authorized by the board.
so the board should.
All I'm asking is.
Say prior.
It has to be expenses reimbursed for activities related to duties of serving on the board.
How does that compare to our current policy?
And where's the budgetary control in that?
We do have a budget for that.
Right, I understand that, but
Yeah.
if you don't ask for some sort of approval on some level, and if one person keeps turning in receipts, and then they used up the entire budget, and the next board member wants to go, they can't because there's no money left, that's not fair either.
I've never seen any one of us have to come to the board for approval to go somewhere.
Yeah, but that's not saying that that's right, though.
It doesn't say approval to the board, it just said activities that are authorized, which I think goes under the auspices of that anything sponsored by WASB is an authorized activity.
There, that's why I brought it up, there's other
Yeah.
things that I've participated in that I didn't ask. Like the community event that was,
So we just be talking about a policy guideline then? If you leave A in, might be talking about a policy
Could
guideline.
be.
and
If I'm
even
understanding.
WASB, even stuff authorized by the board, can go over the budget, it falls something like go. I mean, that's always a risk, I guess. I haven't seen that happen, that we are generally not doing this.
Yeah.
That was my suggestion.
Anyone interested in changing that? Or leaving it as it's currently written? That it should be approved. I'm in favor of leaving it as should be approved.
I suggest that we follow it up with a policy guideline, then if we're gonna leave it in, so that.
Mhm.
What is the guideline on the bottom?
No, I don't see it.
It says the following guidelines have been established by the Board of Education.
So they're talking about changing A from that to say expenses will be reimbursed. So I need a guideline to explain A.
Did you find it?
And, yeah, A is part of it, so I'm talking about a guideline to, if we leave A in, then there probably ought to be a guideline to explain A so that a board member knows what authorized activities are.
That's why I suggested we take it out.
I'm against taking it out.
Yeah, I think we leave it in.
I don't mind
We can look
providing
at-
you with- If you're unsure of the authorized activity, that's where you could
Right.
go to whoever the president is
Yeah.
and say, is this an acceptable activity or something?
Exactly. So we can look at potentially doing a policy guideline, but that won't affect this policy that's currently written. It'd be an addition later.
If we follow it up with a guideline, then I'm in favor of leaving it in.
You gotta clarify that. Because legislative events, community events that we go to, partnership events that we go to, if a board member wants to see what their expenses are, we should be able to go to those events without coming to the board and asking permission.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah, now, how often do you submit expense receipts?
I rarely do, but I have gone to a lot in the last 4 or 5 years of events that would fall outside of the WASB range. Enough that I saw this as an issue, enough. And you don't discourage board members from.
I don't think it
It's not, it's
does.
just saying that
Yeah.
you have to be authorized.
And if it's a true board-related
Because you may think,
topic,
while you may think going to the Hills Corners Drink-a-Fest at the library is a board function, this board may not think of, so, and would say, no, you would want to do that on your own if you want to go.
Okay, so unless you want to do both,
well, I mean,
it's out there, it's not gonna be-
yeah.
Anything that-
Okay.
With that, the bottom to a voucher is submitted to the board, would that more for the district, you just submit that to the district. That's a,
I'm sorry, which one? Yeah, it says right here, it should be signed by the board president.
yeah.
So he agreed with
Correct
you.
that.
Yeah, we'll get that corrected.
One, 0155, what happens, this is the biggie for me. Our old policy really laid out, and not, always corrected, and we didn't always
Because it says here it falls under just a committee, standing committee.
Right. That it doesn't make it sound like it's a regular board meeting. And I would like to see us change that, and that can go back to the committee, and talk about getting that all changed.
So you're saying that the committee of the whole meeting, which is the meeting that we're having now, right, is no different than any other committee meeting?
That's,
But yet we don't allow community members to speak.
Say what you just said again, you lost me.
If the committee of the whole meeting, which is what we're having now,
Yeah.
is considered as a regular committee meeting, but yet we don't allow community members to speak. We allow community members to speak at committee meetings. If this is a committee meeting, then we're not following that.
Makes sense to
And
me.
I don't know that we have, you know, it's gonna get late tonight. I think this is so big, I would like to see us, where would you clarify our committee of the whole as a regular board meeting? How would we add this back and where?
What's the policy number for it right now?
Right now.
Yeah.
185. And references 185 and 186.
I think they should all be considered regular meetings. And fall under the regular meeting heading.
So we're switching from committee of the whole, making it a regular meeting from now on?
Yes. Because that would align with how they're acting now. If we want to continue the current practice, that would accomplish it.
Is that we have a committee of the whole, and that it's different.
But it's a name, right? It's committee of the name. But how is it acting different?
We allow people to speak even though people have, I'm sorry.
We run those as more discussion items, we don't take action at those meetings. We do those different than the regular board of business. We allow, like you said, more interaction, but mostly it was, this is our discussion portion of this meeting, and then the next is committee of the whole. There was discussion that we wouldn't have other committees, that most of these discussions we would start to have. I don't think we've ever fully made that transition to what a committee of the whole should be. We were moving in that direction, now the policy has taken that completely away. I'm for making it two regulars if we want, I just think we should have a larger discussion about that. And perhaps the simple way to do this, if you wanna get this done in the next 2 weeks, is to pull back in our policy on the committee of the whole, or somehow add that language in here, if you wanna continue the current practice. If you wanna change it to 2 regular meetings, then we would have discussion at one meeting and voting at the next, how does that work?
But we could still accomplish that of having a discussion in the first meeting and just voting in the second of each month. We can still accomplish that without labeling them committee of the whole and business meeting, by just calling them regular meetings.
I would suggest then that the policy committee rewrite that policy on regular meetings and put that in there.
I don't think we need to rewrite it.
Don't get me.
Any other thoughts?
Well, it's not clear.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not clear at all.
yeah.
We haven't clarified anything.
So the current policy just has one statement under standing committees. It's the only part you can find the committee of the whole. And it just says, if it's not a standing committee, then it's called a committee of the whole. And I think we were in this transition, and honestly, I feel like we're sort of, we haven't completely made it, because, so what we'll do tonight, because we need to take action, and this is how it will be every August, I'm just letting you know that, because we can't go with only one action meeting in August. We have too many, we had to hold a special one, and right now we probably should hold one next week, because we have some hires we have to make, and we still don't have them, and we might lose some candidates if we don't, so I'm just letting you know that. So what we've been doing is holding a committee of the whole, and then adjourning it, and then holding a special meeting, and I think that the intent of that was to let the public know that we don't take action on committee of the whole, which is a true committee of the whole. And so we've intentionally said we're gonna adjourn that, because in the past, the committee of the wholes, they were being called, and that's where I got confused, was we were taking action at a committee of the whole. That's why I was very confused. You don't take action at a committee of the whole. But a full transition into a committee of the whole is we're trying to decide how this is. So we are sort of morphing them. We haven't made the complete transition, and that is a discussion that we have to talk about in terms of that. If we're comfortable the way that we've started to morph, where committee of the whole is very clear that there is no action, and if on that evening we have to take action, we will just convene what's called a special one, so our community and staff know that that's the part that takes action. That's one issue, I think, on our end of it. What else goes into a committee of the whole then? We started, if you look at tonight's agenda, you know, we have any standing committee reports, or however that is. The part of it is, you know, we've been trying to morph a lot of different ideas and trying to get individual things and meeting all these things, and I'm not sure that we're quite there yet. And honestly, it's because a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on how it should be. I'm just going to put it out there. And so we have what we have right now because we haven't had the discussion about what can we live with or what do we have to, because people still will continue to have opinions on what is or isn't working. And so this is a critical conversation in terms of that and what we want to see, how much level of detail or not detail. And so I think in terms of what is meant by committee of the whole, if we're going to go purely by Robert's rules of what a committee of the whole is, I can tell you that we're not there. Or if it's, I guess that's really the question in terms of that. And I think part of having a committee of the whole and not standing committees, because you will rarely find people that have standing committees and committee of the whole and business meetings. You don't have all three of them, and that's what we were trying to have, and that's the part that it got messy. I think the use of the policy committee in this case was an absolute perfect reason of why you needed to have it. That was too much detail to bring to the committee of the whole. That would have just been, you know, so that's an example of when you do have a standing committee and need to do that. We have been bringing more things to the committee of the whole than we did with standing committees. We haven't totally eliminated them because there will be some things. So I'm still not clear in terms of where that is or how we function. And maybe it falls under policy guidelines eventually, but in terms of structure, if I were a community member wanting to look, you know, where do the details, do they get fleshed out through guidelines coming up? Maybe. Is a way of doing it, but I don't know too if we're, in terms of format, if we've arrived yet.
So this is going to take a deeper conversation to determine how we want to handle it, and we're not going to have that decision tonight. So are we comfortable moving forward with the policies as written, with the understanding that this fall we'll meet as a group, determine the structure going forward, and then write policy guidelines to define that?
I would not be, because it needs,
Okay.
here's what I would suggest though, can I?
Well, hold on. You said you weren't, so I asked a question. You said you weren't. Hold on. Let's add. What?
I would suggest that we possibly, I think it's 167.3, when we get to that on meetings, if we want to for now, just say that we will have 2 regular meetings. I'd be comfortable with that for now. And that at least covers us for now, even if we call it committee rule until we get a chance to have a more,
Yeah.
a bigger, I would prefer a little bit of change here to at least cover us, rather than doing something we are not doing.
Yeah, so we'll follow these policies. We'll stick with 2 regular meetings each month, and we won't call it a committee of the whole.
I don't think we have that when we come to that committee, that number.
Well, then, anybody else uncomfortable with doing that?
I would agree with that.
Okay, Quinn? Stephanie?
What do you have up there, Kathy?
This one's just the one that says regular meetings, the workshop meeting, at least once each month on a date and time and place. And by resolution, of course, that means that we have to meet every
By law.
Okay.
That's a statute. That's simple.
Right. And you want to change this to have 2 regular meetings a month?
No, we're going to leave this all. We're going to decide after this if we will hold 2 regular meetings a month or design a committee of the whole to follow Robert's rules and then have a regular meeting. So
And what
we'll
are we
just
using in the
determine
meantime?
Meeting structure. We're just gonna stick with 2 regular meetings a month. Follow the regular meeting format.
Change that to say 2 meetings.
No, this is statute. The statute is, and that's what his explanation says.
At least one.
You have to have at least one.
You wouldn't put that in policy, you'd put that in guidelines.
So we're not gonna change our current practice of 2 meetings a month.
Just for right now, we're just gonna call them board
2
meetings.
regular meetings.
Until we can clarify what that means.
Yes, we'll remove the committee of the whole and just say board meeting. Okay? Nancy, we can make that
So
change.
that means there's action items that's gonna come up twice a month.
No, we'll still keep it the same. The second meeting of the month will be action items. Until, again, we're going to have a board conversation, not tonight, because it's almost 9 o'clock now. Well, I mean, again, this is why we tried the format we did, to avoid a meeting till 9 o'clock, because I think both policy meetings went to almost 9 o'clock. So we're going to continue with this current format, calling them regular meetings. Still vote on the second meeting. If we need to vote during the first meeting, we'll have a special agenda, like we do tonight, and we'll go from there. Okay. So next.
162 does not address forms for the committees. You might want to check that out.
Okay.
He even says here you may want to add that.
Sure.
because we didn't address,
Okay. But that's all in here. So what other questions you have? Above and like you said, above and beyond what he's actually answered.
I think I got 165 answered.
Okay.
It says at least one, which
Yep.
means we can go above that.
Sure.
Superintendent and the board president set the agenda.
Correct.
I would like that clarified. It just says the superintendent sets the agenda, gives it to the board. And I don't agree that we should stop practice.
Well, it says underneath it. He clarified that.
67,
He clarified that. Which covers your issue that the board president, superintendent collaboratively set the agenda in your district. The first,
Well, she,
He's got it
why
printed.
you jumped off 162 so quick, because I had a comment on 162. Yeah,
are you looking at the explanation though?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I'm looking at the wording of 162.
Okay, can you please, an email went out today.
Yeah, right, just as I was leaving.
It doesn't matter. So an email went out today and the information
I
is on
have
the
that up,
board.
but that's not what I'm looking at. So let me just cover it right there.
I was,
2 forms of quorum should be avoided, as it should be or shall be. Should is not an obligatory, that's not obligatory language. Shall
Do you
is.
have any English teachers? You have any English majors over there? No?
okay, so then your only concern is changing should to shall.
Yes.
Anybody else, straw vote, interested in changing it from should to shall?
Well, does anybody understand why?
Let's just ask.
I don't want to ask,
John,
we discussed it.
John, again, we vetted through every single policy already. You've made your case for what you'd
I
like to
haven't
change.
made the case because you want me to talk
You
about it.
said you'd like to change it from
I'm
should to
telling you.
shall because shall is more strict than should, correct?
It's not
Is that
more
the
strict,
summation?
shall is a requirement.
Okay.
And should is a recommendation.
Understood.
Are
So
we
that's your,
recommending that we don't have
John,
a negative quorum, or are we
you
recommending?
just
Are we
explained your
recommending
point.
that we don't have a negative quorum or walking quorum, or are we requiring that we don't have a negative quorum or walking quorum? That's the difference.
It's already in the policy.
Yes, but it's okay.
This is
We'll just
policy.
bypass it. Anybody else interested in changing it from should to shall? Okay, so we'll keep it as should. Next. Okay, give it next. Go ahead.
Is that 166,
Yep.
the agenda? I'm not clear.
First sentence ends with unless otherwise directed by the board, and we've directed that it will be done between the superintendent and the board president, so that covers us.
Where did you direct that?
That's it.
I don't see that. I see that we should clarify that sentence and say, the superintendent shall prepare in conjunction with the board president and submit to each board member. I just would like you to see, add language in that first sentence that's clear. It's not clear that the board approves the board president to be held. It's just not clear.
Okay.
It needs to be much clearer to say the district administrator and the board president shall,
The superintendent.
or in
And board president.
consultation with the board president.
No, I think you're first. So,
Yeah, district.
Kathy, did you, so So the first sentence, the superintendent and board president
Right,
shall prepare.
yeah.
Okay, is everyone comfortable with that? Okay, next.
I don't know where that went.
And no collusion against Quinn's ideas.
Yes.
Please.
I missed it, Quinn, what'd you say?
No collusion against Quinn's ideas. That should be in there too. I haven't seen
got
my
that
agenda item
spreadsheet.
come up in years.
Okay, next.
He answered the question on regular meetings. We talked about public comments.
Should go check on Kevin, he may have a gun in his mouth.
We've had some issues with overseeing versus, I don't care about that.
Okay.
Well, it's about time. Jesus, man. Banker's hours. It's not the president either.
I just had a question about closed session.
Matt's not coming? Okay.
Okay.
I missed that one. There is a conflict between, okay, go back, I missed this one. 167.1 states that board members can dial in. It's remote access, the last sentence in the first paragraph, remote access during quasi-judicial functions may be permitted after consultation with legal counsel. We clearly state that's not happening, because those are closed session items, correct? Termination hearings and expulsions, we clearly state in 167.8 that we do not allow remote access to closed session.
Correct.
Just so that we clear that up.
That was he didn't touch this. This was Whitnall's policy. This was not a Neola policy. If you read his thing, they didn't have a policy related to this. So we literally took our old policy and gave it a number. So you have to clarify your old policy.
I am not talking about, sorry, 167.8 is fine. I'm not questioning our policy.
Okay.
I'm questioning the one he gave us on voting, 167.1. Go back to the last sentence, and that is in direct conflict with what our policy says about voting. I suggest we take that last sentence off.
But it's not.
Of the first paragraph.
Yeah, unless we want to, with legal consultation, start allowing remote access.
First paragraph.
If you want to, that's fine, just want to make sure we know what we're approving here.
But this will, yeah, this isn't closed session.
Termination hearings and expulsions are closed session.
We have to vote on these things in public, don't we?
Termination, well, the hearing is, well, it depends upon the request of the employee if they want to have a public or closed, but the action to terminate has to be open. Yeah, the vote, like for a termination hearing, is an open session. The dialogue behind it is
We're
closed.
going to be okay with remote access. Maybe you want to add as long as it's in open session.
Well, but it says consultation of legal counsel. So that's a qualifier.
That's why I think the termination hearing, like some people can have a closed or an open, and so you'd have to determine, you'd ask your lawyer, because your lawyer would be there at that point, and they would be able to decide if they would tell you if it's in closed, no, if it's in open, yes.
But they may tell us, the legal counsel may say it's okay, then that's in conflict with us. I mean, I'm fine with that.
We're
Just
not-
want to make sure you know that there's
Okay.
conflict there. All right. 23, point 2330. It's a local decision, he said in his response. I think it's the gifted and talented policy. And I thought that additional.
Yeah, but I think we're getting,
Be eliminated. Just.
okay, so
What
are
number?
we getting too much into the weeds with that?
Well, it's a
2330.
board policy, I'm just.
Additional practice
I
after
heard us
something is
say
already
that.
learned is a waste of time and so should be eliminated.
Additional practice. don't need that. I can suggest it.
2, 3, you're in the wrong policy, that's what I'm.
Because I heard us say that.
2, 3,
From 2330, A. Yeah.
3, 2, 3, 2, 3.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
2,
sure.
3, 3, 0.
So they should just stop taking the class if they understand, I mean, I guess,
She
what's the
doesn't like
alternative to
additional
additional
practice.
practice?
If they already have it, demo, why are they doing it? And we have a chance to set some new tones here in our policies. To me, it sounded like they already get it, additional practice. I'm fine with it, move on.
Okay,
I
thanks.
don't care. It doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense.
Okay.
The summer school program 2440, I just had a question there. Are we approving summer school or not? I mean, it says may, that would lead me to believe that from year to year, we may or may not approve summer school. I thought that was inconsistent. I would have preferred that we either vote on it or not. But the word may seems inconclusive to me. 2440.
Yeah, I think may, it also gives the flexibility to decide which courses we offer each year, which programs, because they're not always the same year after year. And if we say shall, and one year we offer one, and we try to not offer it the next year, they may talk back to say, well, you did it last year, you should do it again this year.
I don't think that.
No, well,
Maybe I'm not.
The explanation says that we're not obligated to offer.
Exactly.
Right.
So if we put shall approve it, it makes it sound like we have to offer something.
I think, Lynn, you're trying to say, does the board approve it versus does the board offer it? That's where this policy just saying is that the board could offer a program. It's not saying that it authorizes a program. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but your question is different, not if the board approves it, or if the board should, but if it can change from year to year, and yes, it can.
Yeah, the program can, but do we have to approve it every year?
She's trying to look at authorizing,
Do we authorize it?
does the
every
board
year?
authorize it versus, it's got two different,
Isn't that kind of weird?
I know what you're saying. The policy is just saying it allows the board to offer a summer school program, but not obligate it. She's trying to say, does the board have to take formal action each year to approve when we do offer it? And that's just a difference in what it means.
Yeah, it wasn't the first name, I'm sorry, it's the second one. The board shall annually approve a summer school program. I mean, I didn't catch that the first one was.
And I think in that case, they're saying may because it's saying that the board doesn't have to offer.
Right, I'm fine with
Yeah,
that.
okay, yep.
It was the second one, the board then shall approve it every year, not, unless they said went with may, because you don't have to. approve it.
That's, yes, that's it, that's
And
what.
that's a little confusing, so.
I understand what you're saying, but that is what his intent is in there by saying it's,
Could say the board shall annually
Shall.
approve a summer school program if
That's what I
offered.
wanted,
Why
that's what I
can't we
wanted.
just put may?
maybe you should say the word may offer, because I think that's what we're really trying to get at, not approving it. It's just offering, it's not obligating you to offer it. What if one year we say it's too costly, we're losing money on it, we're just not gonna offer it?
That's in the first,
That's in the first paragraph.
yeah, this is the second.
Yeah, and I get that, I think that the intent, based on his explanation,
Oh, I see what you, okay, leave it may. I get it.
yeah.
That's why we had these discussions. At the board level. And at the committee level.
No, because it could have been answered at the committee level too.
And at the board level. You guys just get too much sleep, okay.
So what's next?
There was just a 2460, I thought was, if we were changing the name of the program, why would we change the name of? Inconsistent with the way we changed. Oh, I see, you want to leave it all education.
Okay. All right, so next.
Textbooks, I questioned it, I don't recall us ever approving textbooks.
What's the number?
2510.
2510. So I said, why do we, and I went back to our old policy manual, and we, it's not there.
Yeah, the initial approval of textbooks due, and it came to the board. We just did for computer science, and that's typically what boards do, the initial improvement, because of the educational, you need to have some oversight on it by saying that we've done our due diligence.
I wouldn't have even brought it forward had
Burn
the
that book.
state law in there if you did not.
Okay,
state.
okay.
There's places
So,
where the state law is
There's
not
places where
referenced.
it's
Okay.
missing, and that's why.
Educational, yeah, it's like the books
I have a
thing,
question on section 3000.
right?
Um,
Right, am I,
3132 does not, I like it. We want the best person, and are we willing to pay? I just want to clarify on this, best person suited. Isn't that new? Does the board ever want to put parameters around that? Okay, cool, move on.
What did you see with that?
Wondered if we, in 3440, why do we need to approve rates if we are following the federal IRS?
Well, his answer for that is pretty clear, because part of that is best practice, and if they're going to guarantee and defend us if this policy is ever called into question, we need to leave it the way it's been recommended
Okay,
to have it.
Are we approving fees every year? There's going to be some interesting changes when we approve these policies, because I saw an awful lot of reports that should be coming to the board now that are in these policies. You can be approving fees every year
Well,
then.
we, just last year, we went through and decided whether or not to increase that.
We did, but we
So
haven't
that's
annually
approving
done
fees.
that. I know. We haven't annually done that, or we that's still a question?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Usually, according to this, usually I want to consider it next year.
Exactly. Thank you.
I'm gonna make, 5111, I'm sorry, are we okay?
Go, yeah, sure.
I do not like the word alien listed in there, these are children. And I thought that we should put illegally in this country versus the word alien.
Yeah, it's based on the Supreme Court. So that's the legal term.
You wanna leave it that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a legal term, absolutely. I mean, it's not something we're choosing to use, it's a legal term. Yeah, sure. Next.
I just have a question. Lisa, you can take it.
Which one?
5421, when we are moving to not attaching a grade, a letter grade, I just wanted to know if this policy allows for, is it undefined enough? That means we can do assessments and other forms of assessment?
Yeah, this question, honestly, and I think it goes back to Quinn had on the board list of spreadsheets of an agenda item of reassessment policies. And right now, Lynn is overseeing the grading handbook, which the district does not currently have. And so you can expect potentially some of these policies related to homework and grades and assessment to be revisited as we finally do a grading handbook. We're not there yet.
Okay.
And so the problem is that practices got into place before policies and procedures were outlined. So you can expect things like this to come back to you to be more clarified. So
Okay.
it's a good catch.
Thank you. Section 6000, just one thing, and 6220, you said, would you change that? District goals and operation? Add the word goals in there, not just operation? Everyone okay with that? Okay. Jonathan? 6220. I just wanted to see language in there, that's why the priority there, for the not just by operation,
I'm okay with
district goals.
The first sentence.
Well, the first one says the district's operation educational plan is reflected in these records.
Well, the response is that they agreed to change the digital operation. And I'm okay with that, change it to digital operation.
And you're talking
Which
about-
sentence is
yeah,
that?
which
I mean, I'm trying to figure out where he would put it.
Is it
It's not
sentence
fitting
two?
in.
Each budget shall be designed to carry out district operations.
I can't read it.
Where?
right up front, first sentence.
District operation, goals, and
No,
education.
goals first, comma, operations
Okay,
and education.
that's fine, that's fine. So we'll add goals. Anybody else have an issue with adding goals? Okay, Kathy, got it? Okay. Next one?
Do we have video surveillance in all our buildings? That's in the policy? Do we
Yes.
already?
Yes.
Okay. And a list of all?
Yes.
Yep. Actually, she was just here, updating it.
Okay. I wonder on 7510, just do we want to allow all those other groups that use our gyms and tennis courts? Why, I don't know why we only list.
7510?
So which,
What part needs to be specific?
Right there, A and B.
A and B, we want to add.
It just says A and B, I just wondered why we didn't add a few more facilities, people use our facilities. We do allow groups, other groups to use them, don't we, our gyms,
Or theater.
tennis courts, football,
Yeah, Falcon Field, everything,
and
sure.
baseball, right?
We need to make that more generic.
I'll just take it out, I'll just take that out.
so Kathy, on the recommendation.
The only part I'm wondering is, if you look at, it prefaces A and B with the word equipment.
That's different from facility
And I'm just wondering if,
space.
because in the pool and the weight room, there's equipment that we're allowing them to use versus just the physical space. I don't know, I'm just trying to guess. It's weird that they list those two things as equipment instead of a space.
That's fine, if you find that out, then.
Okay, yeah, I don't know, I'm
My
guessing
question.
too.
Just said that you'll respond to it, so.
I guess.
But you would think that if somebody's using a gym, the basketball hoops are equipment and,
It could, yeah, I guess maybe it's
So-
more of semantics than
Yeah.
anything, I don't
So in
know.
the pool, the expectation is you use the floaties?
I'm guessing, or whatever other,
Buoys.
right. I mean, where sometimes if they use the gym, they might have to bring their own basketballs if it's like a club sport. I don't know, I will look into it, is what I will tell you.
Please do.
The only other comment, all the rest of these have been answered very well, thank you. Thank you to administration. The only other question I have is, there was some confusion in the past. I think it says third party access. Or maybe just in that policy on access, record access and maintenance, and maybe it doesn't include there. But somewhere we might want to spell out that, I think the board is the keeper of the superintendent's records. And that was never clear in the past and cost us some problems. So we might want to put notes somewhere that the board president maybe, who's the record keeper of the
Was that a
superintendent's
question
file.
on here? Did you add?
Yeah, it was number 8320, and I haven't really answered anything by the district, the same as all of them.
Yeah, so it would be held by the.
President, no, he doesn't, but I wonder if the board president, I don't know how to say it, but, should be putting the things in there for the superintendent, right?
Which, yeah, but ultimately we would supply to human resource
Not,
director, manager.
not her, but her, I'm thinking of evaluations, those were records.
But that goes in a file.
that goes in her personnel file.
And that would go to the human resource.
Yeah, by
person.
law, it's gotta be given to an employee, which the school board
Okay,
president
so
would
that's
not.
covered then, we have that covered in this
Yes.
policy? That's good point.
Yep.
That's covered then, okay. That's it, and those I.
7540, do we have a good technology plan up to date, and if so, where do we find it? So it says Dr. Olson will respond to this. I realize that the TPI used to require us to have one on file, and they no longer do. But it's a good question as to what our policy will be about, so this is your response to it. So-
Yeah, so according to what the policy is right now, it's much more vague than I think the guidelines were that we had before. And I think in the last memo, we talked about it as we're doing a major survey and all of that stuff. My guess is that we would have it, and I think as I explained before, it would be good to have it that guides us. The purpose of it would be a little bit different. So as we are in transition right now from trying to decide what those devices are, I think the plan is with the surveys we're giving this fall and all of the research we're doing, that would become part of what I would call a technology plan, although we have to understand technology plan is used more loosely than maybe it was in the past when it was required. So, yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions? All right, 6B. Actually, before we do that, I just want to thank Quinn again for all the time and energy you put into this. Obviously, Dr. Olson, Mike, the rest of the administration, thank you. This is a lot of time, months worth of work, so thank you for doing all this work for everyone. 6B, 2017-18 preliminary budget for publication. Go ahead, Mike.
Actually, I'm going to interrupt because we have our representatives from Bray here now. If we could pop back up to the facility planning.
Do we want to finish 6 and then go back, or let me just jump up? I was going to finish through 6. It shouldn't be too long. And then jump back. I'm open to whatever everyone wants to do, though. Mike?
Yeah, 6B should only take about 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of the gentleman's time.
It won't take long. It won't take long.
We can go ahead and go to 5C, then facilities planning, ongoing discussion with Bray. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mike. No, it's
Wait, he should have a different chair.
Give Quinn two.
Yes,
He loves paper.
not ours though. Let's do it.
Do you have, can you go into Todd as well? Yep.
We are not the experts on policy, so don't worry. We are, I think,
It's a good thing you didn't sit through the last 3 hours.
I've been at home watching online, just waiting till the right time. Mike Acker and Ryan Sands with Bray Architects. Thank you for the chance to be here. We were here just a few weeks back, and we handed off a volume 1 of the facilities study, and what we just handed out to you was volume 2. So volume 1, as we talked last time, were the 2 elementaries and middle school, and then tonight this is the full high school analysis. And it's structured the same as the elementary and middle school, where we break down each building system. We walk through ADA compliance. We take a look at how we're using the existing facilities and kind of start to give you some more feedback there. We walk the exterior of the building and comment on the envelope, the existing windows and doors throughout, and attempt to snapshot as objectively and as comprehensively as possible within that document we just handed you. Okay, and so just like we had talked at the last meeting, there's quite a bit of information there, and really it's an attempt to do as thorough of a job as possible, kind of documenting your existing state. Okay, just objective. Do not propose full solutions there. You'll see the building systems engineers do make some recommendations in their reports, so it gives you a little bit of context there, but purposefully have not attempted to roll out solutions in this document. Okay, so this really is meant as a big picture, comprehensive snapshot of the district. And as you remember, when Bray was initially brought on board, we were really looking at Hales Corners and potentially some pool focus. And then quickly as we got into the conversations with the district, as we had our listening sessions and the focus groups, we realized that it's probably pretty important to maybe step back, look more macro across the entire district, make sure we have our hands around the needs at all of the buildings, so that whenever we start to talk solutions, we're thinking of those from a district-wide perspective. Okay, and so that's really the attempt here, is to give you, between volumes 1 and 2, a complete facility, district-wide facility study. Okay, and so as we had talked last time, quite a bit of detail there. So what we thought we would do is provide you a summary document, which is the next book we're going to hand out. Okay, and
Another one.
it's more paper. And really the intent of the summary document is to really hone in on and start to give a framework, building by building, where the real highest needs are, okay? And allow us kind of a framework for us to start to facilitate a discussion moving forward around how we solve those. Okay, and so you can assume what we're going to hand you is basically a condensed executive summary of the full document we've provided. Okay, so why don't we hand that out?
What?
You could probably, oh, I got one. It was taken from me.
Because I didn't get one. I didn't.
So what we'll do is just spend a few minutes here and kind of walk you through this summary document. I think the intent here is that when the board meets again in the future to sit down and start to really hone in on talking about the needs, prioritizing the needs, talking next steps and what solutions might look like, that we're going to use this document and how it's organized as the framework for that conversation. Okay, and so just to give you an overview, and then Ryan's going to walk you through, what you'll see in the book we handed out is each tab represents a different building. So tab 1, if you flip to that, is Edgerton Elementary. And what we've done is attempted to organize and summarize all the needs from the study document into kind of key categories. Okay, so the first category is infrastructure and building systems. Okay, so all the items that you see in those first 19 there are going to talk about building systems, HVAC systems, plumbing systems. It'll talk about envelope of the building, ADA compliance throughout the building. Then we have a category focused on safety and security, one on educational space. So we really hone in on how the building is serving the curriculum and maybe where we have key focus areas for potential solutions moving forward. We have a couple points on site, and then an other category which gives us a bit of a miscellaneous to categorize some things into. Okay, so Ryan's going to just spend a few minutes and kind of walk you through what's here just so you can see. And certainly as we go through this, feel free to ask questions, or at the end we're happy to answer any initial questions. Otherwise, I think the intent is that moving forward, when we meet back as a full group, we can do a comprehensive kind of Q&A session and kind of a roll up our sleeves work session at that point as well. Okay? Sound good? Okay.
So like Mike said, we broke this down by categories, and so especially the first one, but they all directly relate to the more detailed study document that we received. So if we start with Edgerton, you'll see some similarities here, especially between the two elementary schools with regards to some of the infrastructure and building systems needs. As Mike mentioned, things like ADA compliance and some of the MEP replacements, light fixture upgrades were recommended in some cases. We talked about security cameras earlier, so there were some extensions recommended there. And then if we get down kind of to some of the more maybe solution-based, not solution-based ones, but things that will potentially lead to solutions. So you look at like the educational space. Looking at some things, if you flip out the plan, so the plan on the next page is kind of a summary of our architectural walkthrough. So it touches on things like non-ADA compliant restrooms, exterior envelope, and various kind of upkeep or building items such as cracking walls or flooring, those types of things. Then if we look at some of the educational space needs, we're looking at things like ways to improve transparency between corridor and classroom or corridor and academic space. There's some circulation things in Edgerton specifically where you have duplicative circulation that precludes having natural light into spaces like the library. And then there's the basement space, which presents some circulation issues as well. we go to tab 2, which is Hales Corners, you see this is kind of the longest of the 4 lists, especially when it comes to infrastructure and building systems. So, we've got 30 items here, a lot of similarities with regards to some of the recommendations, but then some very specific ones when it comes to some of the mechanical and electrical systems. Recommending replacing the 120, 240 volt electrical service, things like that. As we look at the site here, and you'll see this on in both categories for the site and safety and security, there's some definite site circulation and traffic flow concerns that could potentially be addressed, as well as secure entry. And then when we look at the educational space, some similarities here as far as trying to create additional transparency potentially, lack for small group instruction and general resource space to support things like the Plex delivery model. But then there's some specific ones here at Hales Corners related to music and art classrooms, sizing and proportion, and the flexibility to serve those curriculum areas. And then like we talked about, kind of some of these appear in multiple categories, such as the site circulation. Similar to Edgerton, then we've got the floor plans that kind of highlight key things from our architectural walkthrough, again, as far as ADA compliance, the building envelope, and other areas of the building there. The middle school, tab 3. So this is probably the shortest list, but still some similar systems infrastructure recommendations for upkeep and repair, ADA compliance, specifically here with interior doors and restrooms. And then safety and security, really tied to some of those more typical system upgrades. And then with the educational space, here again looking at transparency, creating opportunities for personalized learning spaces, and then potential for STEM or STEAM educational spaces. And then with the high school, again, kind of a similar list of infrastructure systems, again, directly correlating to the report that we handed out this evening. And then when we looked at some of the kind of building and educational space needs here, there are a couple where the space is directly affecting instruction, such as the cafeteria, with the size of the cafeteria necessitating 3 lunch periods, creates intermediate class that has to start class in the block scheduling, stop class, have lunch, and then resume class. And so that space need is directly affecting the instruction and the curriculum and the experience of the students in that case. So there's a couple of those, here at the high school that could potentially be addressed. Anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, and so I think it's important to note at the high school, specifically, there's been a number of Act 32 projects going on this summer. The study does take into account those, okay? So once you get into the detailed analysis, just know that that's been documented and kind of included within the study. As we had noted here, as you get into this in more detail, especially from the educational standpoint, you'll see really we're purposefully do not propose solutions. Okay, so we're really just trying to document where we see challenges, where it's been identified, whether that were through conversations with faculty members, our parents, early conversations, administrators, or even just our own observation moving through the buildings. And so, again, you won't see solutions here, but obviously our next steps as we start to talk about where do we go from this information, we'll start to, with your support and eventually a community survey, start to prioritize and look at how we might solve for these moving forward.
So just, I think, to recap, I know that especially last time, when it had 3 of our buildings and this document, there's a lot of detail in here. And I think the expectation wasn't that you as board members memorize the detailed stuff, but to show that we're really doing the due diligence to the community, that anybody who this is their expertise or wanted to say, how did you arrive at whatever we arrive at, you can follow the process all the way through by saying we had this detailed document. I think when you look at the summary you can see now how they synthesized it, at least down to here. And this is still a little bit larger, obviously, than we're going to give to the community when we want them to prioritize. So, but again, we've been trying to be pretty diligent on the process we've been following all along in terms of covering everything and not missing anything, whether it be ADA concerns, facility, educational, which wasn't necessarily a lens that was looked at like from its own piece last time. So we're really trying to just make sure that it's very thorough as we synthesize down to like what the next step is. So as we started out the meeting talking about on the 28th, the goal will be to sort of start with the summary piece of it and winnow it down to a point, looking at the 4 buildings, where and maybe getting some dollars around some of that, because I think if you look at some of those, you know, you're not going to say no to some of those, or how do you prioritize them, because they have dollars attached to them, right? This costs $5, this costs $5 million. Well, that makes a difference in how and where I'd prioritize some of that stuff. So we now need to start linking some of that stuff together in terms of that's an infrastructure facilities piece alone, or that's an infrastructure and is impacting educational pieces of it. And so now we need to look at both of those lenses together to decide what we bring back to the community, have them prioritize. And that was sort of, you know, a little bit different in terms of the process of the step and making sure that all 4 buildings, and I think you can look at the list that some buildings have longer lists than others, and that I think is naturally part of the process. So I think it, you know, to some extent confirms where it was before. But it just gives a more comprehensive look and at least looked at some of the other pieces, even though they may not have as many needs. So their homework for the 28th, I guess you can read all of them back to back, but I would say looking at at least the 1-page summaries has got the categories that are there from that lens would be helpful in terms of, and then we'll work through that night in terms of whatever that might be, coming up with how do we synthesize what we're going to ask the community to prioritize in terms of that.
Well said.
Does that sound?
Yep, well said, yeah, because obviously sometimes you solve for one thing, you set a domino in motion, you need to solve for other things. So what we're going to try to do is be prepared to help answer some of those questions. So it's really more of a facilitating a dialogue between the board, and then with that, it'll give us, I think, more context to start to really prepare that survey for the broader community.
So now, in between, we want to set up, so we discussed potentially having people be able to contact you in between, to kind of vet through some really detailed questions that we may not need to go through on the 28th. So if you'd like to establish time to talk with them, contact Mike and Lisa, they'll coordinate times, set up a conference call, whatever it may be, and you can talk through. Really, if you have some in-depth conversations that you want to have between now and the 28th, I'd ask, please reach out to them and do that ahead of time, if nothing else, so that they can prepare to present to the whole board, or possibly flush you some of the questions that as a full board will be going. Okay?
So they will still be there, but if you personally are like really into mechanical systems and just have a burning desire to know more about that in preparation for that, or just because you're curious, they volunteered, like they will meet with you in terms of all of that. That's not in lieu of what they're doing on the 28th. It's just that some of you might have more interest in some areas or really want to do it, and it will really allow us to focus our energy in times of making collaborative decisions on the 28th.
I have a question on something with the high school, if that's all right. So one of the things that started all this, or got us to this point, was not just the concern for the adequacy of the space at HCE, but also of the pool at the high school. And in using this document, these documents to show that we
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Not addressing if we want to increase it to 30 meetings, but does the pool work for educational purposes? Not
Correct.
for other reasons. Does it work for educational purposes? What do we need to do to improve it?
Correct. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And there may be more things like this as we get into dialogues, more emerging STEM curriculum and other things that aren't in here because we may not be doing them all today. And so I think that's part of what we're hoping to get out of the 28th too, is how does the board feel? Where does that focus need to lie for that, that identified need?
So to go with what you said, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact words, but essentially, the functionality of the facility, or how we intend to use it, that's what I see.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we can work on that in preparation for the 28th.
Yeah, and I
That's
think-
not a
That'll be
problem.
a separate designation of, okay, this is where we need to get to, what would that look like? It wouldn't fall in this, it would be a separate project. Say if we want to get to here, this is what we do.
What does it look like?
Except that it doesn't show, I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't show, I mean, the public to look at this document and say, why have you guys been trying to replace your pool? It says here all you need to do is some ventilation work and some spectator seating.
Well, that's what they need to do right now with its current state. It's us to explain the why. We can't have it, but that's not their job. That's not what they were charged to do with this.
Okay.
That's a separate project, a separate item.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just noticed, is Edgerton, is that lower level, I thought that was not wheelchair accessible.
That's it's an elevator.
There is an elevator? Okay.
Yeah, and you'll see that just to the left of the art room, there's a box with an X in it graphically. Yep, that's an elevator.
Well, it must be,
Yeah, Hales Corners has multiple spots that are inaccessible. Yep.
Any other questions right now? So again, if you can, if you know that you'd like to talk with them, please follow up with Lisa and Mike, preferably early this week, so we can get on their schedule before the end of next week, in the time. Even if you just set up a block of time, go through, maybe you say you don't have questions, you can cancel it, but at least there's something locked in, so you're not pressing it the last minute, okay? Work for everybody?
Thank you. Thanks for your flexibility.
Thanks. I think we're gonna. We'll be fine. We'll be good.
So we're going to go back to 6B, 2017-18 preliminary budget for publication. Go ahead, Mike.
So this is, again, this is the second budget that you're going to approve. This is after some changes throughout the months of the end of July and now into August, where we hire some additional staff. We know what insurances they're taking. We fine-tune some other pieces of the budget. The budget that you see before you in this packet is what will actually be published in September and what will be presented at the annual meeting. Even regardless of changes that occur now in September, this is what you're going to see published and what I'm going to present on. So, I'm not going to go into detail. The detail that you will get will be at the annual meeting when I do an awesome presentation. But until then, you're just going to have to wait or ask specific questions. This is the piece where we kind of talk about the detail. So this is the DPI approved detail that the board needs to pass. In your board folders, I gave you a sneak peek of what the actual publication will look like. If you want, yeah, I know, yeah, it's big. So if you want to take a look, it's actually less detail for the public than what is in the public packet. But we'll publish that twice, Kathy, and then we'll have an annual meeting booklet and the presentation on those details at that meeting. When?
How can you do a budget without knowing what we're getting from the state?
I'm guessing.
Okay. And is it a 1.73 increase? Did I see that?
1.73.
Yeah. Just going off memory.
No, it's actually, percentage increase total levy from prior year, is that what you're asking? Or-
Oh, it's lower.
Oh, in the budget publication, it actually published.
1.84.
1.84, that's all funds. That's, yeah, all
So
funds.
it's gonna be a decrease of 1.29%?
For all expenditures in all funds. That has nothing to do with the mill rate or any piece like that. That's all funds together. But remember, the mill rate is really only based on Fund 10. So, for example, we're going to be spending out of Fund 41, right? We're going to have some expenditures out of Fund 41. That'll drive up our total expenditures, but that has nothing to do with what the mill rate is expected to be. We're expecting to keep the mill rate flat.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you. And still fund everything, huh?
Well, the principles
Within
and
reason.
we disagree, but I think we fund enough. Oh, yeah. It is. It may be at 997, because that's the numbers that are coming through right now, versus 994. But we,
That's what we were just going over.
that's the dollar amount levy, may go up. When you spread that out over property valuation increasing at what we have in the budget as 1.5%, it keeps the mill rate the same. Yes. Yep.
Then someone asked me, the total revenues are going down,
Yeah.
but the revenues are going up. So, you know, how all the numbers fall, right?
So the total revenues are going down for two main reasons. There was about $220,000 of unexplained revenue last year.
Right.
And then there was another 1.3 million that we brought in for Act 32.
That's what I thought.
And now that's going down to 600,000 currently. So that's where the revenues fall.
32, and then we have this windfall, okay?
Be clear on that. Be clear on it.
Yeah, please.
Please, we need to.
There was $220,000 of budgeted revenue that was
Prior to Mike's arrival.
fictitious. It didn't exist.
It had been carried over from multiple years before, unexplained, and so he was expecting it to be there in a category that had not been for several years. So that's what's meant by that.
So it was missed in the past.
Look in the books.
It was just a budgeted line item that didn't exist.
That's it, that's all.
It was on the income side, not the,
It was on the revenue side. The expenditure side had its own issues. This year would be great.
16, 17.
Yeah, for 16, 17.
So are you basing this on the 200, 205?
So because I've seen now both the governor and the Senate propose 200, I am using the 200.
Okay, thank you. Item 6C, room 280 construction. Just a reminder that we'll be voting on this item during the special meeting scheduled after this meeting tonight. So Lisa, Mike, and Todd,
Yeah, so this is,
if you could just do a quick.
yeah, this is in conjunction with a lot of pieces. We want to use room 280 for the purposes of the 6603 agreement, which is Part D, in order to make that room comfortable and usable. We need to install some cooling into that room at the price tag of $18,150. Most of it this first year will be covered by upfront by Whitnall. Schools that come into the 6603 agreement over the next 3 years would share in some of those costs since they're going to be using our space as well.
Any questions?
yeah, what was, I guess I could save that for the next question, for the next item. I was just gonna ask, I can't remember what CISA had been, we're moving away from using CISA,
Yeah.
that's part of the purpose of this 18,000.
Yes.
50. And then the next thing is the big number, so I was just gonna ask what CISA had been costing, what are we saving by?
Yeah, it was somewhere around a little over $50,000 in transportation alone.
Okay.
All right, and then the tuition costs, John, I'd have to get back to you on that.
It's around 20,000
Around
per
20, so
student.
you're looking at, yeah. So you're looking at now, we hired a teacher to take on that program, right? And then these costs and materials that we'd have to purchase. This first year, you're probably looking at a wash because of the extra construction costs.
Maybe a slight walk cost, but it'll start paying for itself by next year. Okay?
And then having more schools in the consortium, just even helps if they come. Greendale right now, yeah.
Greenfield is still part of it, just to let you know, so they just don't have any students at this time, and that's why you won't see that. But
Any other questions on the 280 construction? Okay, then we're going 60 to 66 down with 301 agreement, this regional special ed center. Again, we'll be voting on this again in the special meeting following this meeting, but
Yeah, it's really just, the specifics are in there.
any questions?
So this was ties into my last question.
Yeah.
And so the 208,000 is, will be maybe not quite saving all that this year, but next year will be ahead. At least in
That's the goal,
Yeah, that is the goal, correct.
the other thing I'd like to point out, Lynn, 4 middle schoolers, 6? How many middle schoolers are we planning on putting in there? Do you know off the top of your head? 4? So just to let you know, we were not serving 4 of our special ed middle school serving students. We think what we could have been through a program, and so but we also didn't want to send them away to CSUN, not just because of the price tag. So we'll be able to serve some of our middle schoolers that we weren't serving last year in this too. So I just want to say that it expands the educational opportunities in addition to meeting the needs of students that we were sending away to CSUN.
So essentially, this next year, we're looking at 1 Greendale seat and maybe 12 Whitnall seats, only 8 seats that we would have had they sent to season.
Correct. Yeah, so it could be like next month, Greenfield calls us up, they have a student who transferred in their district and say, do you have a spot open? And then they would become part of this, and then we would modify it when we would add a different district.
How many should we accommodate?
Right now, the policy states are 15.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. 7, comments from the school board. Does anyone have any items for future consideration? Excellent. 8, board member announcements. So I have a couple. I want to thank the middle and high school principals. I know Charlie's here, Laura's not, but the welcome emails that came out were fantastic. I got one, obviously, and I don't know if other parents did too, but
I did.
well, you should check your email. No, but the emails were great. I mean, it was just, hey, here's who we are, welcome to district. And then Laura's not here to show it, but for both of my middle school sons, we got a postcard from her to each kid and says, hey, welcome back, we're excited to see you. So I thought that was a great touch. And then obviously Mr. Zen's new band director with the emails and then meeting with the band, she's a meeting great. We got a lot of great feedback on that too. So just thank you for hitting the ground running. That's great. Any other announcements?
Football starts this Friday.
Oh, that's right.
Girls volleyball tryouts right now. It's starting.
Any other
Go
announcements?
get your supplies.
Saturday, technically our first home swim meet at Greendale Park. It's the only outdoor swim meet in the state of Wisconsin.
Wow.
Wow.
Tennis is Union Grove tomorrow at home.
Wow. Excellent.
Monday is the solar eclipse. We have our science club participating with that.
Saw the email.
That's great.
A lot of good stuff going on.
Okay. Any other
The
announcements?
Amtrak thing's full like nothing.
Any announcements? Quinn? Nancy? Any announcements?
I'm just talking.
No, I know you are, but you can. I just, do you have any announcements before we move on?
No.
No, okay.
Let's move on.
All right, thank you. So a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Let's go right into the next. So I'd like to call the board to verify compliance with open meetings law and adopt the agenda. So action items number 2. Do I have a motion to approve item 2A, the Berlin 280 construction?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On to 2B. Do I have a motion to approve the 66.03 overall agreement?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all.
There's the end cap that's going through the clips,
Oh, really?
and it's sold out like that.